Welcome to the City of Cupertino Planning Commission meeting of Tuesday, September 9th, 2025. This meeting has been noticed as being at 10-350 Torrey Avenue, Council Chamber on the page 1. However, there is a typo with the wrong address on page 2. In case members of the public were to visit the venue mentioned on page 2, city staff will appropriately guide them to the venue at Community Hall. And with that, we will proceed with the meeting today. The first item will be our Pledge of Allegiance. If you will join us for the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. Thank you. Madam City Clerk, may we have the roll call, please?
Commissioner Fung?
Present.
Commissioner Linskog?
Here.
Commissioner Sharp?
Present.
Vice Chair Casulcheron?
Present.
Chair Rao?
Present.
All present.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda will be the approval of the July 22nd, 2025 Planning Commission minutes. If commissioners can take a moment to look at the minutes if you haven't already, and if I can have a motion, please.
I move to approve the minutes.
Second.
Madam City Clerk, if you may have a vote. There we go.
The motion carried unanimously.
Thank you. The next item on the agenda will be postponements. I believe we have no postponements. And so we will move on to oral communications. This portion of the meeting is reserved for persons wishing to address the commission on any matter within the jurisdiction of the commission and not on the agenda. Speakers are limited to 3 minutes. Madam City Clerk, how many comment cards do we have?
We have 2 oral comments in person, and I see 1 hand raised on Zoom. Our first speaker is Jennifer Griffin. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening. I was just going to say, I know we had issues with this Tuesday night. Are we more stable now with the volume going up and down? Okay. Can you reset my timer? Because it was a long evening Tuesday night, and I had a headache by the time we were finished. No, I'm glad we're doing this. Anyway, hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin. I wanted to speak tonight about one of the housing bills that has come down from Senator Wiener. This is SB 79. And I'm very, very concerned about this bill because my house is 1/2 mile from Stevens Creek Boulevard. Stevens Creek Boulevard is currently a transit area that would be affected by this bill. There has been a great deal of conversation. This bill has been amended probably 20 times already, and it has strange descriptions in it. It's kind of like Alice in Wonderland. And my understanding is that there will be more modifications made. It is currently going to an assembly floor vote. I would have all of our assembly member and every other assembly member do a no vote or vote of no record on this bill. It will, if it survives that vote, it will go back to the Senate for another floor vote. It may be amended any time, so we don't know what we're going to wind up with. It's kind of like the Frankenstein bill. I would recommend that any senator in the state, including our Senator Josh Becker, do a no vote or a vote of no record. If the elected official maybe believes that this bill is good, but their constituents disagree with it, I think they, at this point, owe it to the public to err on the side of a vote of no record. They save face, and they also show that they have been listening to their constituents. This bill is endemic of a lot of the problems that have been happening with the housing bills. Not once has members of the public in the last 7 to 9 years been able to vote on any of these housing bills, and therefore there are a large number, I will call them homegrown groups in the state, that are building up power right now to push back. I belong to 3 of the groups: Catalyst for Local Control, Our Neighborhood Voices, and Livable California. I contribute to all 3 of them and to several other groups. I think that it is time that the people of the state take back their local control and send a message that, yes, maybe there are problems, but with the high fake RHNA numbers that have been given out to each city, we can't ignore the issues with these horrendous housing bills. I hope 79 goes away, and let Senator Weiner try again next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer.
Our next speaker is Lutheran Williams, followed by Lisa Warren, followed by Nori. Welcome, Lutheran.
Okay. Dear members of the Planning Commission, thank you for the opportunity to speak with you this evening and for your openness to hearing our perspective. As you may know, in 2015, Forbes ranked Cupertino as one of the most educated places in the United States. Tessellations is proud to be a part of that tradition, serving local families and contributing to the city's vibrant educational landscape. We also recognize that our presence has brought changes for our immediate neighbors. Many were accustomed to a quieter environment, and having a school next door has been an adjustment for some of our neighbors. They have voiced their concerns, and we have tried to work with them to be responsive to their issues. One of their greatest concerns was having a high school on the Regnard campus. We have listened, and we have removed the high school from our CUP request. We now hope we can work with the city and the neighbors to address additional reasonable concerns they may have. Our amended CUP request reflects 2 important updates. We no longer are pursuing a high school on the Regnard campus. We are requesting an increase in our enrollment cap from 300 to 425. This request is an increase is imperative to us, as operating at a cap of 300 students is not sustainable for our future. We are also asking the Commission to consider removing the requirement for permits for routine school-related events. These events are central to a school community and should not carry unnecessary barriers. In addition, we would like to revisit 2 restrictions in our CUP. After-school programs, the current cap is 125 students. We would like to expand this not only for our families, but to serve the wider Cupertino community. Summer programs, the current cap is 200 students. We would like the opportunity to increase this and to partner with respected local organizations such as Stephen Cates Camp and Camp Galileo to again be of service to the wider Cupertino community. We are mindful of traffic concerns and have already taken steps to ensure smooth operations. Drop-off and pickup times are staggered, and the process has been working well. Should enrollment rise, we are prepared to increase the number of staggered schedules to keep traffic flowing efficiently. Beyond our own efforts, we have reached out to the City of Cupertino Transportation Department and West Valley Patrol to collaborate on solutions. Specifically, we've requested the development of a safe route school map for tessellations. We're waiting for the Planning Department to do a traffic study. We've requested an additional on-site observation by the City Transportation Department, independent of the CUP study. We've asked for increased traffic enforcement around the school during peak hours. These proactive steps reflect our commitment to resolving these issues with our community. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Lisa Warren, followed by Nori. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. So I raised my hand because the question was asked if the audio had been fixed, and I just want to mention when you all stood up to do the Pledge of Allegiance, there was 0 sound at all. So if that's normal for not being right by your microphones and there's nothing else to pick things up and you sometimes need it to, that should be noted, I think. You were just standing there, no one could hear, well, I couldn't hear anything you were saying with the Pledge of Allegiance. And then when Jennifer got up to speak, and also when Chair Rout was speaking, there, from where I am, in my home, where it seems to be okay, sound-wise, except for there's the underwater effect where with sorry, I'm blanking on the term. Anyway, few speakers are not clear. They wobble in and out with the little underwater thing going on, even this last speaker, but it was minimal with him. So that's just one comment. And after listening to the last speaker, I would like to say I'm very glad that Tessellations has chosen to remove their idea of having high school, because as I understand it, the promise was they never would. So it doesn't feel like that's a negotiating point, because they were never supposed to try for that, based on what I've heard from several people, and I didn't look it up in writing myself. So if that's the case, it's great that they're doing it, but it never should have happened. I think I'll stop there with my comments about tessellations. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa.
Our next speaker is Nori. Welcome, Nori.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you for this opportunity. Bicycle is considered a vehicle as it is a machine used to transport people and is subject to the same traffic law as a motor vehicle under California law. For the reason, riding a bicycle on the sidewalk is prohibited because unsafe for both pedestrian and cyclist. City Memorial Park specific plan says since the park does not feature any designated bicycle trails, bicycle riding in the park is discouraged due to potential conflict with pedestrians. Pedestrians were injured by bicycle in the Memorial Park. I know people who were injured by bicycles. A woman was even taken to hospital. I was almost hit by bicycle a few times. There are many families with small children, seniors who use walker or cane, and people with baby stroller in the park. Those people cannot move quickly when the bicycle comes fast. Building a bicycle rack in front of a gazebo in the middle of the park encourages more people to ride a bicycle anywhere in the park, even your playground. Park is no longer a safe place for the people and the children who are walking, jogging, and playing. The bicycle rack should be placed in the Memorial Park parking lot, behind the Quinlan Center, or behind the pickleball court bleachers, because bicycle is considered as a vehicle. Cyclists and pedestrians cannot share the narrow walkway in the park unless city built the bike lane just like a street to protect pedestrians. Otherwise, it might cause more injuries. Small children ride a tricycle or a small bicycle are exception because their parents are always watching. There are many cycling trails in Cupertino, Memorial Avenue Bridge over 280, Rancho San Antonio, Foothill Boulevard, Stevens Creek Canyon Road, Linda Vista Trails, and many more. Please consider pedestrians first. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Nori.
We have no speaker cards in person and no hands raised on Zoom, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Madam City Clerk. With that, we will close oral communications. The next item on the agenda will be our agenda item 2, which is a public hearing. We are going to consider municipal code amendments to multiple chapters of the municipal code to make minor edits for clarity and consistency. Application number MCA 2024-004. Applicant is the City of Cupertino, location citywide. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, we do. Thank you, Chair Rao and members of the Planning Commission. I will be turning the staff presentation over to Emi Sugiyama, who has been the project manager for these code changes, which mostly affect Chapter 19, but also have some amendments in Chapters 14 and 18 as well. So with that, I will turn it over to Emi.
Thank you, Luke. Good evening, Chair Rao and Commissioners. Emi Sugiyama. Oh, I think it's on. Is that not good? Okay. Perfect. Okay, little increased volume there. Good evening, Chair Rao, Commissioners. I'm Isuyama Planning Staff here today to discuss the proposed changes to our municipal code. So these modifications are being brought to you today in an effort to align our municipal code standards with current state law as well as internal practices. This includes updating the code to meet requirements for Senate Bill 450, as well as making our standards more objective and therefore better aligned with state requirements. The modifications also introduce minor corrections and edits, including addressing some typos and improving phrasing for readability. And in general, these modifications are intended to help streamline the city review process, as well as aid in a more consistent application of our municipal code standards. For a bit of background, Senate Bill, or SB 450, was passed in September of 2024 and went into effect at the beginning of this year. This bill modified the requirements that cities must follow when reviewing SB 9 projects. And just as a reminder, SB 9 projects consist of duplex development and two-lot subdivisions in single-family residential zones. Generally, SB 450 requires that the city approve or deny an SB 9 project within 60 days of receiving a complete application. Otherwise, the project will be deemed approved. This bill also limits the city's ability to require certain subdivision standards and prohibits the city from applying standards to SB 9 development that are more restrictive than those that are applied to other developments within the same zone. Accordingly, many of the proposed municipal code updates that you'll hear tonight are intended to align the single-family standards with the SB 9 subdivision and development standards. To address the requirements of SB 450, we have first proposed a new section in Title 18 that incorporates the objective subdivision standards that were previously applied to SB 9 subdivisions and now would be applied to all two-lot subdivisions within the city, within R1 and RHS zones. These standards include requirements for lot configuration, driveway and building pad locations, as well as grading limitations. And then we've also, to address SB 450, proposed changes to chapters 1928 and 1940, which regulate development in R1 and RHS zones, respectively. These include the addition of new or revised development and design standards that were previously applied to SB 9 projects and now would apply to all single-family development. For example, future development within single-family zones would be required to provide a designated refuse bin storage area, as well as some private open space. These updates also include the removal of some standards that had previously been applied to SB 9 developments. So the city would no longer be able to regulate or impose the 2,000 square foot size limitation or the restriction on basement and balconies. SB 9 projects would instead be subject to the same size, basement, and balcony requirements as the R1 and RHS zones. Outside of the changes that were needed to address SB 450, we also have proposed some minor changes to apply to all projects within the city. Among these are updates for a proposed minor change to Chapter 1415 to align our standards for landscape documentation with the 2,500 square foot threshold outlined in state code. We have also proposed changes to Chapter 1418 to align our standards related to protected trees with our zoning ordinance, as well as to better align the current process with our internal processes. And so this includes the addition of a standard outlining that there is a requirement for peer review of arborist report. That's to make it clearer for the public. To provide some additional clarity, we've also updated some of our definitions. we have added new definitions for balcony, deck, front yard entry porch, entry feature height, gross lot area, and porch. And then we've made some minor changes to some existing definitions as listed on the right side of this slide. Finally, we have proposed 2 new standards within our zoning code. The first would introduce an expiration for applications that have been inactive for more than 180 days. And then the second would limit an applicant's ability to demolish a residential unit where a replacement unit has not yet been proposed. And so with that, we are recommending that your commission adopt the draft resolution recommending that the city council find the actions exempt from CEQA, as well as adopt the proposed municipal code amendments. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Emmy. And we will go to clarifying questions with that from commissioners. I will kick it off. I have a first question, which is the requirement for peer arborist. Is that something new? And I believe that's not in the state code, so why do we have that?
Right, so that's an existing requirement or policy that we have internally. We do have a requirement within Title 17 that all reports that come to us be peer reviewed. And so this is ensuring that that's clear for arborist reports that are more so regulated by Title 14. And so it's just making it clear to the public that that is a requirement. We do require that mainly because we can't ensure the quality or exact work that's being provided to us through an applicant's arborist.
And I can understand and appreciate the need for a peer review by a peer arborist in cases such as commercial projects and even the city's own parks projects, where with Memorial Park, I believe the city had a recommendation where 65% of the trees were to be replaced in the Memorial Park specific plan. And that certainly can be concerning, and we would want to see a peer review on that. However, for an R1 project, do we believe we need a peer? Because I'm concerned about the cost this places on residents. The cost to hire an arborist is non-trivial, and now we have an arborist cost and a peer review from another arborist, so it's doubling the cost. Right. What is the cost for an arborist review, and is this really needed?
So I can't necessarily say that there's one specific cost for an arborist review, right? Because that does vary from project to project. But generally, we do have an alternative, which is that you can go through the city through one of our consultants to obtain an arborist report rather than having one prepared and then peer reviewed. You do have to pay the cost to prepare that. And so that would be the alternative, again, to the kind of doubling up that you would see for having your own and then peer reviewing it.
Thank you. And then can you call out explicitly, are there any other changes that are net new and not required by state code?
So only those that were outlined in there would be the significant changes in the presentation. And then as well as in the staff report, we go over minor changes. Those are going to be more related to reference edits and or typos that we discussed before.
And so I'm hoping, I know that you went through the presentation pretty quick and we don't get the presentation ahead of time, so we don't have the slides. So I'm hoping you're able to maybe call out specifics in the presentation where it was net new addition, because once again, I do want to be aware of where we add burden on residents in terms of cost.
Right. So the changes that were made that were not related to SB 450 are going to be in the latter half of the presentation. Those are the changes that were made to our landscape codes. And so that's going to be, again, the addition of the arborist report that we discussed before, as well as the incorporation of some language that we had within our zoning code, moving that over to our landscape ordinance. So that way there's consistency between those two sections of our code. We also have the new definitions that were outlined on that slide, and I can go over those as well if you're wanting to, but generally the new definitions are related to architectural features, and that's so that when we kind of bolster our design standards, we have something to refer to and it makes it more objective. And then the last changes are those two standards that we outlined for the administrative portion of our zoning code, and that's going to be the expiration as well as the demolition restriction.
Thank you. I will pause there and open it up for other clarifying questions if commissioners have questions.
If I could just add one thing, I'm sorry to interrupt, on the arborist report and tree removal. So for R1 properties, really the only trees that are protected are the native oaks and a few other species versus commercial properties or where you have development trees required for screening. a whole range of trees are protected in that case. So for R1 properties, people can remove, even without a permit, very mature trees, including things such as redwoods. So for R1, it's fairly limited with what you even need a permit for or where you would need the arborist peer review. So there is a difference based on zoning.
Yeah, I was more concerned about the development projects and the privacy trees and the cost of a peer review on those. I believe Commissioner Scharf.
So if a resident goes through the city to use an arborist, you said they have to pay. Is there a certain cost, or does it vary by project, or what?
It does vary by project. I would say that the standard, I mean, I'm going to speak a little out of turn here because I don't deal with them on a day-to-day basis, but I believe that the last one I dealt with was about a $2,000 arborist review fee.
Okay, and then the other question, if someone is assembling a larger lot from two existing lots and is demolishing both units, they're only replacing it with one unit. Is that not allowed because they're not replacing that? They don't have an application to replace both units, right?
Right. I believe that the language that is proposed here is really just noting that we need a residential unit proposed. I think in the rare case where we may see two homes demolished where one would be rebuilt, there may be state laws that would take over that would require development of two of those units. And in the case that it doesn't, I don't believe that the language as written would restrict them from demolishing both.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Any other commissioners?
So actually, just to touch on the landscaping again, for R1, is it rare to have a requirement for screening plantings? It seems like we've had those a number of times in hearings where they were applying for a second floor, for instance. So that would be an example, I think, in R1 in space.
Yes, it would be for trees that were put in for screening, because in that case, they're seen, it's more of a privacy issue.
Yeah.
So you're wanting to maintain the privacy there. But I was thinking, whereas it's just trees, it's actually a pretty limited number that are protected in R1 zones, unless they were put in for screening purposes.
Right. Okay, great. And then could you commented on what again, it was just a sample of what the arborist fee was. Can you repeat that?
I believe it's $2,000 was my most recent
okay.
example.
Thank you.
Vice Chair.
Yeah, I had a clarifying question around the hillside zoning development structures. So it says if you have a building that is smaller than 500 square feet, but it has a steeper slope than 30%, it could actually just be built with no exception and no going past planning. And are we concerned at all about the security of such a structure?
So that's a current requirement where we have a threshold of 500 square feet for all development across 30% slopes. As for the security and safety of that structure, it is reviewed still with our geologist, right? We still require the same structural information. So that would still be reviewed as part of the project, regardless if it's 500 square feet or more.
Okay, thank you.
And there was, anyone else? And I had another clarifying question. So there was a comment about recording privacy trees as a part of a covenant on the deed. Is that a new requirement? And is that, again, what is the origin of that requirement?
Right. So that's a standard internal practice that we have for all trees that go in that are related to development in particular. So that's going to be your privacy trees as well as development trees as a whole on larger properties. And this is just codifying that requirement to make sure that it's clear to the public and no one's caught off guard throughout that process.
And so it is an existing requirement that the city requires as a part of the process to issue permits and inspections, clearing inspections. Okay. And then you had some language edits that changed the word building permit issuance to building permit inspection. Mm-hmm. What is the reason for that change? And what is the technical change in terms of timing for the applicant?
So The difference between the issuance versus inspection is really that it's pushing out that requirement longer for the applicant, meaning that they don't need to do it before they start building, before they start construction. They just need to do it before they're able to occupy the structure and they have their final inspection. What that does is it allows for more time for an applicant to provide those documents or to do that work, and then it doesn't create that hold. And so what we've seen is that we've been lenient towards that anyway. We haven't seen that it's necessary for the issuance, and therefore we're okay with moving it towards final.
Okay, very good. If there's no other questions, we will move to public comment and open it up to members of the public that wish to speak on this item. Are there any public comments on this item, Madam City Clerk?
We have one speaker card in person and one hand raised on Zoom. Our first speaker is Jennifer Griffin, followed by Lisa Warren. Welcome, Jennifer.
I'm sorry, Mr. Okay. I can hear Emmy sometimes. So anyway, hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin, and that was interesting that Mr. Scharf brought up the part about someone possibly combining lots, because in, I think, Brentwood in LA, someone bought Marilyn Monroe's home and was trying to bulldoze it to combine it with their adjacent property. And I mean, we're talking about half-acre properties, but it's sort of the same thing. But the judge came through and said that it's designated a historic, her house is a historic location in LA and cannot be taken down at this point. Anyway, yes, if we had that type of housing, that would be wonderful. In this regard, I just had a couple of questions. When you all were talking about basements on a SB9 lot split, is there a maximum size of a basement that can be constructed on a lot like that? And how does the basement size affect the new total area of the lot? In conjunction with that, it said that you all had a new term called usable rear yard. What exactly does that signify, and how does that affect our current situation on, let's say, an SB9 lot split, or homes where we have multiple ADUs in the backyard? Is usable lot size only being used for a specific type of zoning, like R1, R5, et cetera, et cetera? My other question was, let me go back here for a second. Usable. In terms of demolition of a home on a property that is going to be rebuilt, it used to be, I believe, that if someone took down a home on let's say, an R1 lot, that they had 1 year to put the house back up, or else the permit would run into problems. How is that being handled now? I haven't heard anybody talk about it. We have had lots of things that were stalled, even in the neighborhoods, for multiple years. And I think 1 or 2 of them have had homes taken down, but then the lot just sits. Can you guys explain how that affects someone who had an active permit? So I'm just saying, I think it's a good idea that people leave the structures up until they actually begin the process of demolition and rebuilding, because we're just winding up with empty lots all over the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next speaker is Lisa Warren.
Thank you. Report, Emmy, you always do a great job. Commissioner Fung mentioned and asked about the required R1 privacy screening being considered protected trees. And I heard the answer, but I'd like it clarified a little bit more, if possible, because it needs to be very clear that those anything that's required needs to be protected. And the other part of that is many of the currently and hope to be changed items that are listed as suitable privacy screening for residential are not really trees. They're shrubs. They're listed as shrubs. And if you don't protect shrubs, that could become an issue. I'm getting nitpicky about this because this has been an issue forever that we've been trying to fix our selection of, because there's so many, well, there's enough inappropriate privacy screening quote unquote trees that are really trees that are completely inappropriate for a space of 5 feet setbacks on either side of a fence. They're too big, they grow into the houses when they get their full potential, blah, blah, blah. But for example, bay laurel shrub is being used a lot for privacy, and it's a good one, but it's a shrub, not a tree. So I hope there can be some clarification, because I have lived a nightmare with, personally, and it's ongoing. And it doesn't matter how many times code enforcement goes out and speaks to someone, you can't undo the damage they do to privacy screening. And we just need to make it harder to do that. That's the best way I can say that. And I guess that's all I'm going to talk about in this. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lisa. We have no speaker cards in person and no hands raised on Zoom, Chair.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. With that, we are going to close the public comments and come back to commissioners for any additional questions or opening it up for discussion. Are there any other questions at this time? So I did have another clarifying question. So it appears there is a expiration of application after 180 days if the application was not responded to and deemed incomplete. Is that a new requirement?
So we currently have an internal policy to try and review and get back to people and kind of question where they're at after 90 days. However, this is a new requirement in the sense that we've never had it codified or make a standard in any sort of way. So this 180 days is new in that form.
And what is the reason that we're introducing these new requirements as part of a code update that was intended for refreshing the code to incorporate state laws?
Yeah, so I'll give a little background where we actually started this code update prior to that state law going into effect. This was part of an effort to streamline more processes and make things clearer for the public in general, and also just some of the general code cleanup that we do from time to time. This then became incorporated with the SB 450 updates because it coincided sort of with the timing of that, and we were able to work on it simultaneously. So that's why you see kind of this mix of both these standards that are more so towards our code cleanup and codifying practices and the SB 450 portions. And so, again, I think that's why you're seeing this specific standard incorporated.
Yeah, and so just to be clear, if a single-family homeowner were doing a remodel and the application was deemed incomplete and they could not come back to you for whatever reason in 6 months, the application lapses, and if they paid $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in fees, they're going to have to pay $50,000 again?
Right, so they're given courtesy notices to let them know that we're looking for more information, and then they have the opportunity to respond with any sort of response. Inactivity is really when they haven't given a response within that amount of time. So if they say that they're working on the application and they say we've hired X, Y, or Z person to do X, Y, or Z work, and they're still working on that, we'll check in on that. I don't think that this is a hard and fast rule. It's more so for projects where we see that they're dragging it out in order to either have certain standards or certain fees in place at that time be applied to them rather than, the current ones, that we can have a mechanism for having those closed out.
And so it is a balancing act, I admit. There are cases where state law might loosen over time, and so someone may want to drag it out, whereas someone that is genuinely kind of hard pressed for time, can't get around to something, maybe they're dealing with a work deadline and 6 months goes by, you'd hit sort of lose $50,000 on permit fees. Is this something that should be, is there a precedent to this? I mean, are there other cities doing this today?
There are, yeah. Many other cities have a 90-day deadline as well as this similar 180 days, which is about half a year. So,
Okay. Yeah, I would probably look for support from my fellow commissioners on reducing the burden on our residents. You know, we've $50,000 for someone that stayed decades in their home doing a remodel is not a trivial amount. And just want to be sensitive to our residents here, especially these are all R1 related and sort of single family related changes, right? And the burdens are much larger than some of our other typical R3 considerations. Are there other comments from commissioners? Commissioner Shaw.
So if a homeowner responds to you saying, hey, this is why this is what we're doing, what we're taking so long, does that reset the timer or have no effect on the timer?
I mean, at this point, there would be some discretion involved in that decision, right? And so I believe that our practice currently has been that does sort of reset the timer. It also is on a basis of having planners available to follow up on these. Again, this is just in the cases where we see that we're seeing an extreme amount of time pass, that we have something to kind of fall back on to show that we have a right to ask for them to close out that permit.
Can
Okay.
I ask how often that actually happens?
It doesn't happen very often, I will say. Most of the time, people are able to complete most of their work within the given timelines.
Commissioner Fung.
If I could, well, go ahead. No, you were speaking.
Sorry, I had a clarifying question about the definition of balcony on, I think it's on page 34. You added a definition of what a balcony is, and I was just wondering, would it make sense? Because there's true balconies where somebody can step out and stand on, and then there's false balconies that are more just for creating light, but they don't actually have a platform to stand on. But they're very different, and their requirements are very different. So I was just wondering, would it make sense to separate out the definitions, to have separate definitions for true balconies versus false balconies?
And just to clarify, when you say false balconies, you're referring to maybe like a Juliet balcony where it's just maybe a 1 foot?
Exactly.
Okay.
Or even less than 1 foot,
Right.
right? Sometimes it's just a barrier, or it's 1 foot, but it's a non-walkable, more decorative structure that's kind of attached to the window or to the structure, rather than an actual balcony that you could walk out on that's attached to the building exterior. So it feels like at some point we might want to make a differentiation between those. So if we are updating definitions, now might be a good time to create specific definitions for both.
Sure. And the note I'll make on that is that we do call out a balcony as being a platform. So I would think that if it's just the barrier that we're talking about and that we're just addressing kind of an architectural feature in that way, right, where it's there for only aesthetics, that this wouldn't necessarily apply to that.
Right.
And then for Juliet balconies, the only consideration I will add to that is we do have our privacy requirements that do expand as we get to the balcony range, which is now a 180-degree view shed rather than the 30-degree view shed for windows or other features like that. So
Right.
those are the only two considerations I'll
Yeah,
add.
so there are privacy considerations if I can walk out 3 feet out, right? Versus if I can just look out that window, and if it's a 1 foot, or even 6-inch platform. So the word platform by itself doesn't necessarily help differentiate between a true balcony and a false balcony. So I was just thinking it might be a good idea if we're doing this now to create those definitions.
So a separate.
Because there's privacy, what's the word I want? Privacy repercussions. Thank you.
Commissioner Fung.
Thanks. To Commissioner Lindskog's comment, I think perhaps putting a minimum size that it might extend from the house that may be sufficient. There could still potentially be a question about about visibility, but if you say 6 inches, 9 inches, whatever, that probably would solve that problem. I also wanted to comment on Chair Rao's comment regarding the addition around expiration. Yeah, I'm uncomfortable with that as well. I think even it's probably true both for a private homeowner and for a business. When there are times like these where there's instability in the cost of materials and cost of labor, it's very easy, I think, to get in a situation where you may have started into a proposal and then found that that I can't continue right now. So I would hope we would give some consideration for that. If this is not something that happens frequently, then I would perhaps consider a longer period of consideration. Maybe make it a year instead of 180 days. It's kind of the same problem. By the time you get into a year, it's getting to be a bigger thing. And I think adding a more formal notification, just to make sure that you don't get a situation where somebody got to the last day or unfortunately went over by a day and got different treatment. I think trying to solve that by making it discretionary probably is worse than making it better. I would also comment, I think it's come up with a couple of comments here, that there were a couple different functions that were happening in this package. There were the SB5 or SB9 modifications. There were routine state changes, and then there were a couple self-initiated administrative changes. And I think, particularly in the case of the administrative changes, those would probably have been better to come separately. That way, I think that it's certainly we have seen many routine. There was a change in state law, and this is a normal reaction to that. But I think that particularly given the size of this document, even though it's really kind of, I don't know, I kind of saw it almost as three times repeated, the different forms of the same information. It's large enough that you may have missed the discretionary ones. I actually was not crazy about either of those recommendations. I would, although I think that the second item, with regard to replacement homes, is intended to keep the net number of homes, from decreasing as a result of a project. When we're talking about R1 region and the fact that you're really talking about small numbers of housing units, I think it seems as though that may be unnecessarily restrictive. Even though I would generally say, I'd be supportive of projects that can yield more housing. I think that there will certainly be cases where this would come into play, and I'm just not. It's just not clear to me there was that big of a benefit. So I would say on either of these, I would prefer that we remove them.
Thank you, Commissioner Fung. I would actually go a step further and really be asking ourselves if the agenda item read that this item could cause applicants to have to lapse their application and pay another $50,000 in fees as a standalone agenda item, or if it required them to double their costs of arborist review, would there be more people from the members of the public here commenting on that versus someone seeing that this is a state court update? And I'm really concerned when we add costs to residents. And so I'm actually going to test for whether I have support when I make this motion. I'm going to move the staff recommendation with the addition that any changes not related to state law be removed from this and brought back as a separate agenda item. Do I have a second?
Yeah, I'll second that. And let me say that is just good practice to separate these things. It's not a good idea to be combining required state law changes with something that, we just think that would be nice to do. So I would certainly support you.
So we have a motion and we have a second. Do we need any further discussion or?
So does that motion only affect the second item, or?
Sorry, say that again.
Your motion is that? Well, it's actually to remove both the.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. All right.
Could I have one question as staff? Other items such as things that are more spelling and cleanup related, that are just purely cleaning the code up, would those be going forward as part of the motion since they're also not state law related, but they're more readability cleanup related. They're not issues like the 180-day period or something like that.
Yes, so I would modify the motion to allow for state law changes and any correction of spellings and minor readability.
Okay.
If we may. Do I have a second on that? Does the seconder accept that amendment?
Can I
Yes.
clarify?
Okay.
If I may get a second.
Can I just clarify? So is your issue only with that 180-day thing, or do you have other things you want
No,
to make
I
sure
would
we
like
read?
to make sure that anything that is newly being introduced be separated and discussed so that it can get its fair share of limelight.
Right, including the arborist thing.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
And if I could add to that, it would be nice to also have, when this returns, clarity around the exact cost to the resident. Thank you.
And so do I have a second that accepts the amended
Yeah,
motion?
I accept
Okay.
the amended motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and we have a second. Madam City Clerk, can we vote?
Okay. The motion carries unanimously.
Wonderful. I want to thank my fellow commissioners for keeping our residents in mind and making sure we're not adding cost burdens on them. And we want to particularly, make sure that when they spend on a remodel, they're not having to spend even more than what they have to. So with
Chair,
that,
can I interrupt? We're getting some kind of an echo constantly. I don't know if that can be fixed, but it's very annoying. Whenever anyone's speaking, we hear something coming back from the speaker.
could the video team please take a look at that if possible? So with that, I believe we are done with agenda item on the public hearing, which is agenda item 2. And so we will move on to agenda item 3. I want to thank Emmy for a detailed update as always. I know this is very painstaking, and I want to thank staff for your patience working through these changes. And I want to welcome our transportation team. They're getting used to this dais. Do we need a break, commissioners, or are we good to keep going? Okay, sounds like we keep going. So we'll give staff a minute to set up. Okay, so we will start with agenda item 3. This item is an update to the development of the active transportation plan, including a summary of phase 1 activities and an overview of what to expect during phase 2. The recommended action is to receive the update on the development of the active transportation plan, provide feedback on the draft project prioritization criteria. Do we have a staff report?
Yes, thank you, Chair Rao, members of the Planning Commission. I'm David Stillman, the Transportation Manager. Thank you all for giving Public Works staff the opportunity to be here this evening to introduce you all to our developing active transportation plan, which we hope will be a roadmap for a safer and more active Cupertino into the future. I'm joined this evening by our Senior Transit and Transportation Planner, Matthew Schrader, as well as Petra Reyes from Alta Planning and Design, and David Wasserman from Alta Planning and Design, who joins us on Zoom this evening. So I will turn it right over to Matthew, who will lead you through a presentation.
Thanks, David, for the introduction. So like you mentioned, we're going to be presenting what we heard from the public in phase 1 and then what you can expect in phase 2 for the active transportation plan. A little overview. So we'll go into background about how the ATP kind of came together, what its plan goals are, key takeaways from that phase 1 outreach. David Wasserman will present on some of the innovative analysis work that was used to come up with a couple of those project recommendations. And then we'll talk about the draft project prioritization criteria and then move into phase 2 and then touch on the timeline for council adoption in next spring. And the key information that will likely be of greatest interest is the key takeaways from phase 1 outreach and the analysis work. And then we'd really like a focused discussion on the draft project prioritization criteria and get Planning Commission feedback on that. So the ATP was considered as a city work program item in 2023. In 2024, it was included as a CWP item. Following that, council adopted a resolution requesting MTC to allocate the city's share of TDA 3 funding for the purpose of the plan. And then in December of last year, the council approved a contract with Alta for this project, and that project kicked off in the spring of this year. So why the ATP? Well, for a couple of reasons. Cupertino's existing 2016 and 2018 bike plan have guided many successful projects, but they're now outdated. And because they were developed separately, that kind of created some challenges with respect to prioritization and coordination. So the new citywide ATP will kind of consolidate these two plans and then provide a clearer roadmap for future delivery, kind of unifying all the projects into a single document that addresses both walking and biking needs. Additionally, we know there's strong interest in active transportation for leisure, with nearly 2,000 rec trips being logged on Strava each week, and 33% of students in Cupertino walk or bike. And at the same time, we know there's significant potential for growth, as 30% of all car trips that either start or end in the city are less than 5 miles, which is a distance that could be comfortably traveled by walking or biking. And this information really highlights how Cupertino can both serve existing users and grow the number of walkers and bikers through the active transportation plan. So now a little bit about the kind of the context of the plan, the purpose of the plan. As I mentioned previously, the city has made great progress in implementing the PED plan and the bike plan, but they were developed separately and they're largely complete. So this provides an opportunity to kind of unify those goals, develop new projects, and then also consider the needs of motorists within this plan. It will also identify gaps in the existing networks and evaluate traffic and collision data to propose infrastructure improvement projects. The project consists of 3 phases, really 2 primary phases, the first of which we completed in the spring. That was the needs assessment phase, where we went out to the public to learn where there are barriers to walking and biking, where people would like to travel to. At the same time that was happening, the analysis that David Wasserman performed was being conducted. So the community outreach information that we received was combined with that technical analysis to develop the draft recommendations. Those draft recommendations are being evaluated by the community in phase 2. And then we are looking to a April adoption date with council. So the plan goals were developed by looking at previous plans, consolidating those plans, seeing where there are overlapping statements, and then refining that based off the community input we received in phase 1. And the goals that are shown here are ranked in the priority that the community had evaluated them. So the number 1 goal was safety, specifically focusing on the high injury network for investment, better access to city destinations, then maintaining our existing facilities. Sustainability was ranked next. So understanding where there are driving trips that are currently occurring that could potentially be accomplished by walking or biking. Then multimodal balance, which relates to identifying potential traffic impacts and considering those before moving forward with projects. And then finally, fairness, which is about making sure that investments are evenly distributed across the city. And with that, I'll hand it over to Petra.
Thanks, Matt. During phase 1, next slide, please. During phase one of the active transportation plan, we hosted 11 engagement events, and the city installed 36 promotional signs across the city, directing people to the project website where folks could learn about both in-person and virtual engagement opportunities. Across all forums of input, we received almost 3,000 public comments and reached over 1,300 people. This map presents all comments that we received on the online web map. Larger dots indicate where there was a higher concentration of engagement via comment likes or dislikes, and then each circle represents a comment. The pink dots, especially if they're in higher it's a more concentrated color, means there are more negative likes, and green dots indicate a positive like, so it's a like, and the darker color means there were more positive likes. We see that there are clusters of engagement, particularly green dots around the Civic Center. We also see some concentration along Blaney Ave, near Wolf Road, where there's a sound wall that's up there on the dark pink large dot. And then in kind of central Cupertino, there's a dark pink large dot. That represents a comment regarding a Rengar Creek Trail connection, and there were a number of dislikes on that comment, and all of this input informed our recommendations during this phase. The high-level summary of what we heard during this phase of outreach is that people want a connected network of facilities across the city, a focus on improvements to pedestrian facilities, prioritizing safety and accessibility, which were the top 2 ranked plan goals according to outreach, as Matt shared, and focusing on safe travel to school. A few more themes that we heard. We heard a variety of opinions about active transportation and the need to find a happy medium in our recommendations, that we need to consider the trade-offs of building bicycle facilities that will impact parking and traffic. We also heard the need to maintain facilities after they are built, and lastly, to track utilization of new projects. And I'm going to pass it back to Matt. Go ahead.
Yeah, and then we're going to have David Wasserman, who's hopefully online, and I'll move through the slides for him. David, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, fantastic.
Excellent. Well, I'm very happy to be here. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and I'm happy to present a lot of the great analysis that we've done as part of the project. So next slide, please. So I guess to give a quick recap, there are 2 types of analysis that we did that we kind of combined to identify possible gaps in active transportation infrastructure across Cupertino. The first was what we call a active trip potential, where we looked at origin destination data from an activity-based model that was calibrated to mobile data to evaluate where there are short vehicle trips occurring throughout Cupertino. And so as you can see from this animation, if we're talking about what's the potential for walking, we might look at trips at less than a mile. If we're looking at the potential for biking, we might be interested in trips less than 3 miles. And we also have trips less than 5 miles in case we want to understand the potential for e-biking, electric micromobility, for example. And what we found is, roughly 30% of all car trips starting or ending in Cupertino are 5 miles or less. And that's generally something we've seen across many parts of the country, is that there are a very high number of possible trips that could possibly be made with roads. But there are often gaps to getting there. Next slide, please. And part of understanding those gaps to getting there is understanding the on-the-ground experience of bicyclists and pedestrians. When we're looking at their perceived comfort and safety as they use these facilities. And so one type of analysis that we did was a pedestrian level of traffic stress analysis. This is an analysis that looks at components like speed limits, number of lanes, sidewalk width, sidewalk condition, available buffering, and the types of buffers that pedestrians are experiencing, and kind of ranks on a 1 to 4 scale what those types of experiences translate to for different demographic groups. Where when we think about what is a low stress experience, we think about LTS1 being what we would want to see for an all ages and ability network, where even children are comfortable walking in this type of environment. Slide, please. And so in terms of how the pedestrian LTS mapped, what we found was that major roadways, including De Anza, Foothills, and highway overcrossings generally had a high level of traffic stress for pedestrians. And what can often happen is when you have these high stress corridors, it's important to pay attention to the connections across them as well. And in some cases, there are some possible low stress connections across some of these facilities, but in other cases, you can see they are either orange or expressed as a higher stress facility. Next slide, please. Alongside that, we evaluated bicycle level traffic stress. Similarly, this is looking to evaluate the perception and comfort of people riding bikes. And as I heard earlier in the meeting, people were talking about riding on the sidewalk, riding, for example, and that's very common on facilities that can be high stress, where people sometimes feel like the best option is riding on the sidewalk. But when we are thinking about bicycle level traffic stress, we're talking about what is the degree of buffering to the bicyclist, what's the number of lanes, the post speed limit, how wide is the bike lane, and other types of considerations, such as whether it's on a trail, would obviously be a low stress environment. Next slide, please. And bicycle LTS had a few more major roadways that were identified as high stress: Stevens Creek, Wolf, Miller Avenue, Blaney Avenue, De Anza, Foothill, all had high levels of traffic stress for cyclists. There were a few areas that had low stress connections across those high stress those high stress travelways and roads, but others you can clearly see there are still areas where these pose a great barrier to people traveling across those facilities. So what we did alongside these two comfort analyses was then try to translate that with kind of what that experience on the ground looks like, represented through these networks, and then combine that with our active trip potential analysis to understand, okay, these are areas where we see potentially high potential for active transportation based off of the rates of short trip taking behavior. What can we develop a gap score that looks at short trips that could possibly be made if walking and biking weren't as highly suppressed by stressful conditions. And so this is the example of one of the maps that we created as part of the bike gap score analysis, where we looked at where are there large numbers of short trips that also have high stress routing. So if we were to look at the shortest path and then adjust based off of behavior change research, what that shortest path would be if we account for traffic stress, where are we seeing those areas that we're possibly seeing high suppressed demand? And you can kind of see a lot of the locations in the northeast parts of Cupertino. There are a lot of key destinations in areas that are both inside and outside of the city that have stressful routing. for a lot of these high potential short trips. Next slide, please. And so when we combined all that information together for walking and biking, we are able to kind of look at those OD lines and then collapse them onto the hex grid by basically just adding them up wherever they landed. And so the areas that you see in warmer colors represent areas where, for multiple origins and destinations, we saw that there were so no matter where you approached those areas from in orange or red, there were more likely to be more stressful conditions to reach those locations. And there were also a large number of short trips that could not be made to those locations as a result, or are likely to experience a higher stress in order to reach them. Next slide, please. And you can see for the bike's gap score as well, the areas in red and orange are the ones that we see that type of suppressed demand from all directions. And that kind of is the high level of our analysis. With that, I will pass it back to Petra.
Thanks, David. Next slide. So when we developed our recommendations, we incorporated 3 major buckets: the analysis that David just shared with you, the public input that I shared with you earlier, and past plans that the city has already adopted, all of that work that was already completed. And for the pedestrian intersection recommendations, we organized our recommendations into typologies, which represent our toolbox for all of the different options which could be applied at any intersection. In our recommendations, one or more groups, so you see Group A, Group B, Group C, one or more could be applied at any intersection, and what will be specifically built at an intersection is determined later in future planning efforts that involve more detailed level of design. These options provide direction to city staff, but also flexibility when implementing this plan. The bicycle recommendations include a variety of different facility recommendations that range from less separation to more separation between vehicles and bicyclists. As David spoke about, more separation creates more comfort for all ages and abilities for bicyclists who have varying levels of comfort with cycling. In addition to the infrastructure recommendations, the plan includes almost 40 program and policy recommendations. These are to implement engineering, encouragement, education, enforcement, and evaluation-focused programs and policies. And this slide includes examples of just one of each different type of program or policy in the different buckets. And today we're presenting draft prioritization criteria. This scoring method will be applied to the network recommendations and will determine what projects should be prioritized for future funding opportunities and development. These criteria are organized to represent a plan goal, and then some plan goals are weighed more to represent areas that are of higher priority. So for example, safety and access were the 2 highest ranked plan goals. So we see that they have a combined 30, 45, 45, 55 points. Sorry, it's a little hard to see on the slide. But they are weighed heavier when compared to the other goals. Also fairness, which is represented by public input, is also ranked, is weighed a little bit higher. And the other criteria that we've included, the active trip potential, as David shared, and roadway impact, which represents right-of-way availability, and that represents balance. The pedestrian intersection criteria are very similar to the bicycle network criteria. It looks instead at bicycle level of traffic stress as opposed to or looks at pedestrian level of traffic stress for our stress level criteria, as opposed to the bicycle recommendation, or the bicycle criteria will include bicycle level of traffic stress. And then next slide. And the pedestrian sidewalk prioritization criteria are almost identical to the pedestrian intersection criteria. That's it. Yeah.
So now we'll talk about what phase 2 is actually going to entail in terms of the public outreach. Similarly to phase 1, we have the project webpage that has the interactive web map where the community can go, click on individual features, which are the recommended projects, like them, comment on them. We have all of the phase 1 deliverable documents listed on the city webpage for review. We are going to be hosting 3 pop-up events, likely more, trying to get at Diwali and flea market and several other things. We'll be at the senior center as well. So what you see on the next slide isn't representative of the outreach that's actually going to be performed. We'll have 2 community workshops, 1 in person and 1 virtual. And then we have a email address where we prefer people to send comments just so that they're captured in a single place. This is just a screenshot of what that web page looks like. It's an update of the phase 1 web page. So what you see on the map there are those features I was talking about, and you can put your cursor over each individual one and see what is being recommended, and then check that against the visual glossary, which is a button in the top right corner. These are the dates and the events that we intend to be at this fall. So we are here on the 9th. The city council meeting might be moved, so that's a tentative date now. And the community workshops, both virtual and 1 in person here at Community Hall. So what's coming next? The public will review the draft recommendations. We'll then organize those comments that we got, run them through the prioritization criteria, and from that we'll have a ranked list of projects, and also we'll prepare implementation packages which will provide general estimates on what those projects look like, as well as some other details in order to aid city staff in moving forward with those projects. And then a draft plan will be available for public review early next year, and that will be in the form of a editable PDF so that people can write comments on the document, and then hopefully go to council in April of next year for them to review the plan and consider it for adoption. Thank you.
Thank you, staff. Thank you, Alta. I think that was a very in-depth presentation. Appreciate all the work that's gone in. Appreciate your coming out to the Planning Commission as well. I'll kick it off with some clarifying questions. Is this project being paid for by grant funds?
Not competitive grant funds. So this project is being funded through the city's TDA 3 share, which is money that the city receives from MTC, and it's formula-based. So we receive that annually.
So this is not from the general fund, it is from TDA 3?
Correct.
Is there any general fund dollars being spent on this? Okay. And are there conditions for funding this through TDA 3? Are there any conditions that we are subject to?
Just that the project is completed within 3 years.
When you say the project is complete, is that the CWP or the identified CIPs?
The plan itself. So have council adopt the plan within 3 years. I believe that's the only condition. It's the only timeline that I'm aware of from MTC that kind of governs our allocation.
And if council were to not adopt the plan, do we need to refund TDA 3?
We would need to have a discussion with MTC on what that looks like in terms of a rescission.
Is there something more definitive that is written down somewhere that can be shared?
There is. I don't have it on hand, but there is MTC resolution that describes how the TDA 3 allocation process works.
Currently, the project is funded through the general fund, and then we would get reimbursement from MTC through the TDA funding once the project is completed. If the project were canceled or not completed, we would not be eligible for any of that money to reimburse the money that's currently being spent out of the general fund.
And I want to be clear, when we say canceled or not completed, we are specifically just talking about this plan.
Yes.
We are not talking about council adopting the plan and moving it forward in terms of approval to proceed to implementation.
There's an implicit understanding that it would be a final deliverable plan created as a part of this process, so that council adoption would be considered part of what's required in order to be eligible to receive the reimbursement.
Understood, but what I'm trying to ask is, assuming the plan is completed, but council does not adopt the plan and approve the next stage of implementation, does the city owe money back to TDA 3 or MTC?
Well, there's a distinction between adopting the plan and approving the next stage of implementation. So in theory, the city could adopt the plan and then it would sit on the shelf and never be implemented if none of the CIP projects that are identified are approved for funding in future cycles.
Okay.
If that were to occur, then yes, we would still be eligible for reimbursement. But the plan would need to be adopted by the city council.
And one last clarifying question from me before I hand off. What is the difference between this plan and the existing pedestrian plan and the bike plan? The purple dots, you had a map with all the dots that you identified. How much of that was identified in the prior plans, if any?
So those dots came from public comments from phase 1. So none of that information was included or was identified in the 2016 bike plan or 2018 PED plan. This plan is very similar in terms of what it's identifying and recommending, both with respect to infrastructure and programmatic recommendations. And again, it's a consolidation of those two plans, which is pretty consistent with what cities are currently doing now. It's either called like a complete street study or active transportation plan is a common term. Palo Alto is in the process of getting their plan adopted, as well as Mountain View, and the city of Santa Cruz is actually in the same project phase as we are currently.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Other clarifying questions from commissioners? Vice Chair.
So the recommendations on the ATP website, are those example recommendations or are they actual? And just to give you a sense of where this question is going, for example, you have Union Pacific Trail listed on here, and we clearly don't have the right of way for that, even though it's a great idea. So how, I guess, final and serious are these recommendations?
These are the recommendations. The UPRR recommendation is included in there just so that we have the project identified in a city adopted plan should things change and should Union Pacific change their position on our use of the alignment.
Okay, then my follow-up question on that would be, for example, another one, Stelling, the lane. Can you elaborate on why the bike lane would go up to 85 and then it would stop and then it would pick up again across Stevens Creek and then stop again at 280 rather than be continuous?
That is because we currently have a facility there, so this is just the recommendations. If you go on the web map, you can see what currently exists there. So this is just saying that we recommend adding these new facilities to connect to the existing network.
Got it. Thank you.
Other questions? Commissioner Scharf?
I have a lot of comments on the plan, but I think I'll wait until after public comment.
Would you have any questions that you can tease out from that list?
Yeah. I guess the question I have, if it's a high stress level, if you identify it as high stress level, are you recommending a way to convert it to low stress, or are you recommending that you suggest alternative routes that are currently in existence that are low stress? Because I know a lot of high stress areas for cyclists in the city, cyclists just avoid them. They don't expect to fix them to make them low stress.
So the recommendations do take into account the level of stress. The plan is not recommending alternate routes. We will have neighborhood routes also being recommended, so those are options that people could choose. But with respect to addressing high level of stress streets, the plan does make recommendations for specific improvements to kind of address that high level of stress.
So can I seek clarification on that? So when something is identified as high stress, is that your own determination, or is it partially based on that, or is it what the residents are requesting in terms of the input that they provided?
No, so the LTS methodology, and maybe David Wasserman can jump in, but I believe it comes from the Mineta Transportation Institute, and it takes into account the roadway characteristics, presence of bike lanes, additional features, and then there's a review by staff to see whether or not the LTS assignment is reasonable.
Yeah,
Right. So
just confirming.
okay, great. So just to clarify, so when I see a lot of, I think there were orange dots on Stevens Creek Boulevard, for example, that is residents identifying issues on Stevens Creek that they would like resolved. Is that correct?
Yes, the purple dots. Yeah. Or rather, those purple dots are people's comments that received high amounts of dislikes.
Yeah, the comments can be a little bit challenging to just interpret from looking at the map, because sometimes someone will say, it's really hard to navigate the street, and there's a lot of dislikes, which might mean like, oh, I also really dislike this. And you can look on the project website. We still have the results from phase 1. If you're interested in certain aspects of our results, you can go to the map and click on comments and explore the number of likes and dislikes on individual comments.
But you're also capturing comments, like worded comments as well.
Correct.
Yeah.
So some of the dots were not in Cupertino. Is that people that live in San Jose, or people that are just commenting that they go on that route and don't like it or do like it?
The web app comments should all be in the city of Cupertino.
Now, some comments were outside of the city limits, and those could have just been, like you said, both either residents outside not knowing that this is a Cupertino specific plan, and we're only trying to identify destinations and barriers within Cupertino. I'm trying to pull up. We did ask who was participating whether or not they were a Cupertino resident, and I don't have that information included here, but I do recall it was over 90%.
Yeah, okay, I just noticed on the map that there was a lot of West San Jose stuff, and I wish we could influence West San Jose to make some changes too.
Could you clarify that? How do you determine that they're Cupertino residents?
That was just the survey. So we had a general survey in addition to the web app, and one of those questions was about who's a Cupertino resident.
Thank you.
So I like the presentation, the materials. I'm curious, are they available on your site right now in the form that we saw them tonight, or is this?
This PowerPoint is not available online, but on the city webpage, cupertinoatp.gov, we've kind of broken down the process of phase 1 and how we went from plan review to outreach to the recommendations and where we're at currently.
Yeah, I'd actually encourage you to submit that perhaps as whether it's supplemental for this, or maybe just say, you came to the Planning Commission and gave this presentation.
Oh, it will be. It'll be recorded as a meeting.
That was really fantastic compared to the, we had a kind of a abbreviated summary that was part of our packet, and that was really, really great. I only had one question. This is in David Wasserman's presentation. There were a number of the animations where the orientation of some of the lines and areas of interest are diagonal relative to the street grid. I'm just curious, how is it that happens?
That's a good question. We for this analysis, when we were evaluating active trip potential, we did it with a hexagonal grid, and so it's just the hexagonal grid that we use is one that is from a global indexing system that it's not important for the details, but basically they're kind of pre-generated hexagons. And so what you're seeing when you look at the diagonal is just that was kind of the orientation of the hex grid that was used for this particular analysis.
Yeah.
And that's why it looks like it all angles.
Yeah, those were actually very interesting presentations. I didn't know whether there was some enormous force at the ends of college that was drawing all bicyclists from the city, in that direction. But
right.
Yeah, no, I thought the information was really interesting. Sometimes it went by a little fast, when there were many sections of the page, and I think that I would certainly go back and take a deeper look. So thank you very much for the hard work on that.
So I have one little nitpick here. CupertinoATP.gov does not work. You have it as .org, which is very confusing to people because I think we're trying to migrate
My apologies.
to .gov.
Sorry.
And there's nothing at .gov.
Cupertino.gov/ATP. I misspoke.
Okay, so CupertinoATP.org works.
Yes, and that's the project webpage that's hosted by Alta.
So it's, okay, and then the .gov one is what? Cupertino?
Cupertino.gov/ATP.
/ATP, okay, and that's a different, okay.
Sorry, I have one more question.
Okay, great.
Go ahead, Commissioner Linscock.
So can you put up again the slide where you showed what the priorities were that residents highlighted?
The plan goals or the key takeaways?
Sorry, you had two slides of...
Yeah, okay, the key takeaways here.
Right. Okay, so I had a question on this one because the first one says desire for connected networks, so connectivity. And I remember we heard that in the pedestrian plan as well. That was one of the, the city surveys, that was one of the main things that residents said they wanted in the city. But when I look at your scoring criteria, I don't see connectivity listed as a overarching goal. I see safety and access, but I don't see connectivity. So I was wondering if you can clarify that.
Mm-hmm. It's something to consider.
I mean, that seems to be the most important thing that people gave you feedback on.
So the screening criteria are based off of the plan goals. So we tried to align the criteria with the stated goals, which would be safety, access, maintenance, sustainability, and fairness. What the slide that we were looking at previously were kind of just the key general issues that were identified that couldn't be categorized into those plan goals neatly. So what you see in the priority matrix aligns with the stated goals and not people's
desires,
comments. Yeah.
So may I suggest we actually listen to our residents, and if that's a priority for them, that we make it part of our goals?
We can look at that, yeah.
We're
It's also
still in
somewhat
clarifying
embedded.
questions, but we will come to discussion shortly.
It's also somewhat embedded in the categories that we currently have where we talk about access, the need for, let's see, where's the, fills the facility gap within a segment. So it is addressed in some of the other categories, even though it isn't explicitly identified as
Right.
connectivity.
So we can discuss it after public comments. Thanks.
And so I probably have even more questions. I'll try to ask a few. What is the relationship between Vision Zero and ATP? And is there any other project that we should clarify relationships on?
So Vision Zero you can think of as kind of this comprehensive document that looks at all roadway users, including motorists. So in the ATP, the collision data that was reviewed also looked at vehicle collisions. So there are recommendations in Vision Zero about the need for high friction pavement. The ATP is focused on the walking and biking infrastructure. So that's the primary distinction.
But the Vision Zero then is a superset that includes walking and biking as well?
No, there's no hierarchy in terms of like the documents. It's just, I guess the way you can think about this is that the ATP is complementary to Vision Zero in that the ATP reviewed the collision data, looked at the countermeasures that were proposed in the Vision Zero action plan, and then developed specific project recommendations that can be easily integrated into the CIP.
In addition, Vision Zero is strictly a safety-focused document. So the goal of Vision Zero is to reduce serious injuries and fatalities throughout the city. The active transportation plan, in addition to what Matt was saying, is being focused more on active transportation modes, bicycling and walking, whereas safety is an important criteria that is being considered. We also are considering other things such as the closure of gaps and the encouragement of active transportation modes. So there's some overlap between the two, but the ATP is not strictly safety related. It incorporates information from Vision Zero in order to help make the recommendations within the ATP.
And the gaps were specifically bike gaps only, is that right? I did not see pedestrian gaps or?
Both.
When you say both, is it different gaps for pedestrians versus bikes?
There are potentially different gaps for bicycles and for pedestrians.
Because I saw a single chart, it wasn't apparent to me if you had two charts, one for pedestrians and one for bikes.
A chart? Can you please clarify?
Well, you had those charts with the hexagonal symbols.
Oh yeah,
of
there
gaps,
is
gap
pedestrian
scores.
gap scores along with bicycle gap scores.
So is it two separate sets of scores?
Yeah, so they're different types of analysis.
Could we put that slide up?
Yeah.
And I can explain that just I showed the bike score map as an illustration of what we did, but we did the exact same analysis for pedestrians as well. It just was not included in this presentation. So if you go, just to add clarification.
Yeah, it would have been nice to include that. Because the
It is
pedestrians
included here. So we have the walk gap score shown on the screen.
Okay, there we go. So could you maybe walk us through how you've approached the gap scores for pedestrians?
Yeah, so that's David's methodology.
Sure. Do you want to go back one slide?
Yeah.
So I showed this just to make clear kind of what we did for both types of analyses. But for the walk analysis, it was very similar to the bike analysis, except we were looking at trips that were less than 1 mile. And then we were looking at that in combination with the pedestrian level of traffic stress. The only reason why I was including this map for illustration purposes was for one, the walk results were somewhat similar, but not exactly the same. And we wanted to focus more on the hexagon maps, which we felt were easier to explain. So if you go to the next slide, what we're looking at here are where are the areas where there are short trips that are less than 1 mile that could be made by walking, that in all directions of the hexagon, there are not many comfortable routes to that destination relative to the number of trips to that destination. And so I just want to make clear that they were distinct analyses using the two different LTSs that we developed that were specific to the bicycle experience and the pedestrian experience.
And so if the output from all of this analysis is a set of projects, is the intent to be incorporating the set of projects from the existing master plans for bike and pedestrian, the 2016 bike plan and the 2018 pedestrian plan. Are those projects going to get grandfathered into this plan, or how are staff thinking about this?
Some of those projects were grandfathered in. Others were left out due to the fact that they're very infeasible, like a pedestrian overcrossing at 85. That was not included and carried over. So we did review previous past plans, and the projects that made the most sense in terms of delivery were brought over into the new plan.
And so when you come back for a review of those projects, it would be good to have that insight on what was included and what was omitted and why, so that council and our commissions can give you input on that. Okay, I think we're probably using up our question time here, but let's maybe shift to public comments if we have public comments. Madam City Clerk.
We have 2 speakers in person and 1 hand raised on Zoom. Our first speaker is Isham, followed by Jennifer Griffin, followed by Lisa Warren. Welcome, Isham.
Welcome, Ishan.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. My name is Ishan, and I'm currently a junior at Cupertino High School. I'd like to discuss the school proximity weighting, specifically in the ATP prioritization, and how that can be improved on. So just for some context, the current school proximity weighting awards points to projects if they are within a quarter mile of a school. And this is a good first step to having schools as a part of our ATP prioritization, but I'd like to share a few data points which really express how much improvement is needed on this category. So the typical commute radii for Cupertino elementary school students is a half a mile, 1 mile for middle school students, and over 1 mile for high school students. As you may notice, the current prioritization with its quarter mile scope really doesn't take any of our average commute radii for either of the 3 age groups I mentioned into account. So the current school proximity weighting, I feel as a student in Cupertino who bikes to school every day, is kind of a check the box thing, just to say like we're really taking schools into account, but I mean, for the 3 age groups, right, elementary, middle school, and high school students, that's not the case. So I'd like to request that we can really take students into account, specifically because we are one of the most vulnerable residents in Cupertino, while using active transportation, of course, whether that be on foot, bike, scooter, or other modes. And one system that could improve this, it's a pretty basic change, but it would really help with the safety of students across the city, is awarding 20 points if a project is within a quarter mile of a school, 15 if it's within a half a mile, and 5 points if it's on a school commute path greater than a quarter mile from school. So this would still place greatest emphasis on projects that are really close to schools, but would still take into account the majority of our student population here. Thank you.
Thank you, Ishan.
Our next speaker is Jennifer Griffin, followed by Emily Poon, followed by Lisa Warren. Welcome, Jennifer.
I'm assuming you all can hear me. Anyway, hi, I'm Jennifer Griffin, and I just wanted to give a couple of comments about the active transportation plan, and as we go forward. The eastern part of Stevens Creek Boulevard has had the bike bollards, the permanent barriers for the last 2 years. This is from Wolf, Miller down to Tantau, I think. And I just wanted to give a couple of comments about life with the bollards. And as we're potentially rolling these out westward to Dianza Boulevard and out past Dianza, et cetera, et cetera. There is an issue. I would just make a comment that if we're talking about squaring out the corners of major intersections like Dianza Boulevard and Stevens Creek Boulevard, which to me is going to be the main, I'm going to call it the bugaboo. This is going to be one of the most difficult intersections to deal with in this plan. I actually drove over the edge of the, I guess it would be the south east corner of Stevens Creek Boulevard and Dianza Boulevard. You guys actually showed it up there. And I was turning right, and I ran over the edge of the sidewalk. I didn't realize that that corner had been cut that tight. I think we need to put some really, really good thinking into what we're doing if we're going to square the corners off. We need to think about everyone that's going to be at those intersections. Miller and Wolf has had an evolution process. The next thing I'm going to talk about is, and it's one of my husband's main peeves, about are we going to have allow right turns on red lights? And I think now we can do that at Wolf and Stevens Creek, but even with allowing with the squared off corners, and we don't have the free turn lane, we back up. People will back up. And I can guarantee you that if we don't handle the right turn lanes at Stevens Creek and Dianza Boulevard, we are going to have massive backups. So I hope that you all are thinking about that. Think about bicycles, pedestrians, and cars. We're all there. I am not riding a bike with my gout. Hopefully someday maybe I will. Thank you,
Jennifer. Our next speaker is Emily Poon, followed by Lisa Warren, followed by Jennifer Sheeran. Welcome, Emily.
Hello, good evening. My name is Emily, and I have been a resident here for the last 18 years. The first thing I want to talk about is running red lights. Whenever we talk about safety, this is the one primary offense that a lot of people would agree is a problem. So what is being done in our city and in other cities to minimize the incidents and to educate people? Because this is what we have in common with all the cities. And I think that I would like to see all the traffic engineers coming together and give us real-time solutions, whether they be enforcement, photo radar, whatever, because those might have improved over the years. And there might be legal issues because people would say, I'm not driving, and so that was not me. But running red lights is truly a very important problem. I was talking to a very smart man the other day at the coffee shop, and he came back from travels to Turkey, and he said that, we look at these ancient sites, and did you know that many centuries ago, people were already speeding at intersections? Because he said that at intersections, they have all these metal bumps to slow the chariots down. So this is a very age-old problem, and I think all these bubbles, all these dots saying these are the trouble spots, they're fine, but can we just zero in on the one great problem? Thank you.
Thank you, Emily.
Thank you, Emily. Our next speaker is Lisa, followed by Jennifer Sheeran, followed by Herv Marcy. Welcome, Lisa.
Thank you. So thank you, staff and consultants. This is a lots of moving parts. And coincidentally, there's lots of moving parts on our roadways as well. Meaning the people that are activating them, let's say. So I would say if just based on conversations with neighbors and friends and people I don't know, there's a huge stress level for vehicle drivers as well. Because there's a confusion in a lot of times and spaces as to who has the right of way. Is this kind of vehicle supposed to be in the bike lane or an auto lane? There's, again, many moving parts. And no one is really comfortable on the roads these days, I don't think. You have, and I know this is focused on bike head, but there's so many or bicycles mostly, maybe. But there's so many other things than a traditional bike. There's e-bikes, electric motorcycles, fat tire e-bikes, skateboards, razor scooters, hoverboards, one wheels. They're all on our streets. And it's like a wild, wild west. And I'm not talking just about on major thoroughfares, but in neighborhoods. And Emily spoke of running stop lights. People constantly run stop signs. There's no effort to stop or slow down. If they think they can't see anyone in any of the other directions coming, they just go. I've been nearly hit a number of times, once by a mail truck. In this crosswalk, and I'm careful. And I see these kids, and I live near a school where it's complete chaos, and I go over there sometimes just to help the kids navigate, especially when school starts. I just watch them, and I don't engage unless I say, hey, this could have happened based on what just happened, so please be careful tomorrow and the next day and the next day, because these cars are not respecting your bodies. And there's mayhem. And I understand you have to start somewhere, but it would be really nice if there was some education as to who is supposed to be where, what their speed limits are supposed to be. When you're driving the speed limit in the car and a fat wheel bike goes by you way faster, to me, that must not be okay.
Thank you, Lisa. That's your time. Our next speaker is Jennifer Sharon, followed by Herv Marcy, followed by Louise Sadati. Welcome, Jennifer.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Jennifer Sheeran, and I'm a longtime resident of Cupertino. I'm also a board member for Walk Bike Cupertino. I first want to say that I was at the mayor's coffee yesterday, and after the meeting, Mayor Chow hung out with Commissioner Linskog and others, including myself, and even gave us little Cupertino branded gifts. It all ended very amicably. It's important we consider the facts and not try to silence our residents through political punishments or panic and call the cops on those that we disagree with. Regarding prioritization, when you as a commission decide about your recommendation for the ATP criteria, I ask you to consider first and foremost safety and access for our residents. You can do this by making some simple changes. First, as a former speaker, Ishan, said, you could increase school proximity points by extending the coverage area to a half mile or more. Second, you can by eliminating the fairness points entirely. It's not an objective measure, and we should be data-driven. It's also worth noting that this is a really easily gamed metric. For every person that's against creating any bike lanes, there's an awful lot of Walk Bike Cupertino people that will be in favor of it. Creating a comment war is no way to set policy. Third, consider how to handle balance point subtractions. I'm against them as they go against the approved Vision Zero plan, which says we should prioritize multimodal safety and quality of service over motor vehicle level of service and on-street parking. It's a direct quote. However, I know you're getting pushed on this by some of our more emotional and vocal members of our community. Instead, consider basing this on the impact instead of the absolutes that may not accomplish anything. For example, if you have to eliminate one parking space to make an entrance to a whole new off-street trail, 10 points shouldn't be subtracted from a project for that. It just doesn't make sense. Last, prioritize filling in the gaps in the network for pedestrians and cyclists by adding points for a project being adjacent to a trail or a safe Class 4 lane. This allows more residents to reach more destinations safely. Doing these things will get us the best rubric for everyone in Cupertino. Thank you for considering my input.
Thank you, Jennifer. Our next speaker is Herv Marcy, followed by Louise Sidanti. Welcome, Herv.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Can you speak up a bit?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Commissioners, my name is Hervé Marcy, and I'm part of the Bicycle Pedestrian Commission of the City of Cupertino, but speaking in my name only. I am a cyclist, a pedestrian, and a car driver as well. I appreciate the fact that I can express my opinion about bicycle pedestrian matters of the city today, and I don't have to wait until late at night. And I appreciate the fact that I also have 3 full minutes, so I don't have to rush to express my thoughts as a resident of this city, as it should be. I want to talk about a few points that I want to mention about the plan. The first one is the school proximity points that should be increased beyond 1/4 of a mile. My children go to Eaton Elementary. We walk to school using the Regna Creek Trail. We live in a residence that is very close to school, and yet we are still further than the 1/4 of a mile from the school. So we would not like that would not be included in the plan. That measurement is way too short. I see everyday students going to and from Lawson Middle School and Cupertino High, which are 0.9 miles and 1.1 miles away from our home, respectively. Students are our most vulnerable population. The plan should prioritize their safety, so school proximity points should be increased way beyond 1/4 of a mile. The next point I want to address is the balance point subtraction. Again, Mayor Chow and Vice Mayor Moore voted in favor of Vision Zero plan in a unanimous council decision. If these subtractions are in the plan, they will directly contradict a city council decision, thus creating confusion. Moreover, some projects, such as the Regna Creek Trail, which is a resounding success despite the opposition, removed 3 parking spaces at the library. If you ask the residents who walk daily on this trail if this was worth it, you would hear a resounding yes. And yes, by having this indiscriminate judgment of the project, just because it removes parking spaces, it would have deprioritized this project. So instead of that, let's have a project by project. Let's have the project be measured case by case. And yes, if sometimes the project impacts traffic, then we can find alternatives and we can find a consensus. But one thing is that the only constant in life is change. The way people, and especially young people, move from point A to point B changes, and we want to accommodate all modes of transportation and ensure that we have safety for the most vulnerable population, which is students, cyclists, and pedestrians. So an indiscriminate subtraction will not help qualify projects better. Thank you.
Thank you, Hervé. Our next speaker is Louise Sadati. Welcome, Louise.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, wonderful. I think it's very important for people to be able to make their comments at a reasonable hour. 8 o'clock is a reasonable hour. The previous city council meeting had people who are interested in the bike ped commission only be able to speak at 11:30 at night for 1 minute, and then having Mayor Liang then say that further public comment was cut off, and that if the subject was brought up again, that only new speakers could speak for 1 minute only, and that is a real slap in the face to people who want to make public comments, and to have their public comments made in the light of day, or at least 8:30 at night.
This portion of the agenda is reserved for comments on this agenda item. The city council or the mayor is not on this agenda. Could you restrict your comments to this agenda item, please?
Okay, could you put back my seconds from when...
the clock shall not be reset. Thank you.
Oh, well, can it be reset? So the school proximity, okay, the most heavily weighted goals for the ATP should be safety and access. These have the greatest effect on our residents and are the least subjective. School proximity points should be increased beyond 1/4 of a mile. Access schools proximity weighing should include points beyond 1/4 mile and include 1/2 mile and beyond as kids walk and bike from far. Students are most vulnerable. Additional proximity Points for should include senior facilities also, especially for pedestrians. Balance point subtractions should be eliminated. So this way, which subtract points if the projects eliminates parking. This weighting directly opposes Cupertino's approved Vision Zero plan. Fairness should be eliminated. It is not an objective measure and too easy to game the system for or against a project. Data should drive which projects are the highest priority and not subjective comments. Sustainability should include points for proximity to trails or other low-stress facilities, such as Class 4 lanes. This applies for both pedestrians and cyclists. It will help close the gaps, making what we do more effective and allowing
Thank you,
safer
Luis.
flow
That is your
journeys.
time. We have no speaker cards in person and no hands raised on Zoom, Chair.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. At this time, we will close public comments. Thank you to all the members of the public that took time to attend and speak their full 3 minutes at a reasonable hour. And so there are some benefits to coming to the Planning Commission after all. And so with that, we will segue back to members of the commission. Before we do that, do commissioners want a break? We've been going 2 hours.
We can take.
All right, we will take a 5-minute break. Resume the meeting. And so we'll bring it back to the commissioners, open it up for any further questions and comments at this time. If you have questions and or comments, we'll combine both of those. And we have closed public comments at this time. Who wants to go first? Do we have any commissioners that would like to go first with questions or comments?
Do we have a time limit?
No.
Yeah, I read through there. I have a lot of comments on it. So, first of all, based on what the speakers were mentioning, how was the proximity in distance determined to be as short as it is?
It's just a starting point.
So it could be expanded.
It could be, yeah.
Okay. All right. Very good. Yeah, some of the comments I have, maybe because I'm speaking as someone who bicycles a lot, but I really would like more right on red restrictions, not less, and more squaring off of major intersections, because I think what I've seen, it really does slow down the drivers and make them pay attention, especially when turning right. When I saw the walk gap scores, I looked at my neighborhood, which is, I believe is very walkable, and it had a high gap score. So that's bad, right? The yellow, the red is the worst, right?
Yeah.
And then
That's correct.
So I was kind of surprised. I don't know how those got determined. I mean, our neighborhood, and Commissioner Linskog lives very close to me. I mean, we can, probably walk to 4 supermarkets and 50 restaurants, and yet it had a pretty high gap. So how are those gaps? Is that just feedback from residents or what?
No, so those higher gap scores are areas where there is a high number of short trips that are occurring along what's been measured to be a high stress route.
So the stress of the route is considered.
The stress of the route is considered, but if there are a very high number of short trips that are occurring, that will kind of elevate the gap score. And David, if you can jump in and maybe clarify what I'm saying.
No, I think you're right. So I think when we look at the hexagon, we're collapsing the origin destination data into a single set of hexagons.
Oh, David,
Sorry, we can't hear
can you
you.
please move closer to the microphone?
How do I sound now?
That's better.
Yeah.
Sorry about that. It's possible. I'll go back. When we're collapsing the hexagons, collapsing the origin destination gap scores, because it's worth understanding the gap scores are occurring on the actual trips between site A and site B. And so it's possible the areas that we're identifying in orange, there could be a few things going on, even though the local experience for you might be that they're very walkable neighborhoods. It could be that there are trips going over or through the neighborhood that are reaching and hitting barriers somewhere else that aren't necessarily considered. Sorry, that are experiencing stressful routes at some other point along the trip than just where that neighborhood is. Or it's possible that there's different. I want to say like different directions of travel where there are different origins, because it's considering both different directions, the stressful routing, and basically some areas that are orange because they had lots of short trips potentially further away that were going through those neighborhoods, but they encountered their stressful barriers somewhere else than just those immediate neighborhoods.
Okay, yeah, very good. Okay, then there's one place in the document, policy 1.A.2, partner with the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition to offer routine adult and family bicycle education classes in Cupertino. So based on discussions I had in the past 3 days or so, I think that should be changed. Partner with, I don't know exactly how to say it, partner with organizations to offer these, because I've received 2 different feedback from people that used to be involved with SVBC that they are no longer really bicycle focused anymore. They've become more of a corporate lobbying group, and these 2 licensed cycling instructors from League of American Cyclists advise not to use them anymore for bicycle education classes. So if we could not be so specific to include that, but the other 2 organizations are called Bicycle Solutions and Wheel Kids, and they do offer adult and family bicycle classes, and they have done it in the South Bay area as well. So maybe not be specific as to which organization would be offering those classes, to leave it open to using other companies or groups. Then I was looking at where the bicycle counts were being conducted, and I thought maybe we should be adding the counting technology to other popular bicycle routes that cyclists use to avoid the high stress areas. And I'm thinking a lot of people bike across Stevens Creek at Torrey and Vista, and at Blaney and at Tantau, and then they bike across Prune Ridge at Tantau instead of Wolf, and bike to Homestead at Tantau instead of Wolf. It's just cyclists avoid Wolf and De Anza because they don't like the interchange with 280. So they specifically use low stress routes, and I'm not sure we should be concentrating on ways to make the high stress routes low stress instead of directing cyclists to the routes that are already low stress. And there's also a danger if you try to make the high stress routes low stress by making them less desirable for vehicular traffic. Those vehicles may say, well, I'm not going to go on De Anza anymore. Now I'm going to use Blaney, or now I'm going to use Stelling or Tantau, routes that cyclists like to use because they're not so busy with traffic and the smell and all the traffic lights and the interchanges. The other places to count, it's on the next page. Wolf or Miller and Cala de Barcelona, Rodriguez and De Anza, and at Stelling where it crosses 280, or it's Stelling and Homestead on the Sunnyvale border. And I can email all this to Alta Design. Another issue that was done a few years ago to help cyclists was where there's no parking signs for bike lanes, change that to no stopping. Because the sheriff informed me, well, if a car is stopped in a lane that says no parking, they can't give them a ticket because it doesn't say no stopping. So we had all these cars blocking bicycle lanes by Collins Elementary because they were waiting to pick up their students. And that made the cyclists veer out of the bicycle lane into traffic, which is almost worse than not having a bicycle lane at all because, they're having to always veer around cars. So I'd like to see that as a goal to have more no stopping where there's a bicycle lanes and less no parking.
Commissioner Scharf, would you like to yield and then come back for another round?
Let me see how much more I have here. No, I don't want to yield. Okay.
And
so I don't have much more.
Okay. Because I might have to test the system if you keep going.
So as one of the public speakers mentioned, the red light running and the failure to yield to pedestrians, especially right turns on red, it's almost like an epidemic in Cupertino. And I don't know how to address that, if it's traffic calming or more enforcement or what, but something needs to be done about that. The cell phone zombies, that's a big issue on De Anza Boulevard over at Mariani/Infinite Loop. So I don't know if we could work with Apple to do something about that, but these are pedestrians that are totally oblivious to the walk signal or the traffic light. They're just walking across the road, concentrated on their cell phones. Okay, my last one is, I'm sure something we've all seen, is residents that walk in the street at night with no lighting and no reflective clothing. And I'm not I was told they walk in the street because they don't like the unevenness of the sidewalks, but that's something we need to address with pedestrian safety, and I have no idea how to do it. Education or what, but I hope we can do something about that. And yeah, I have one more thing which I'll say for later.
Thank you, Commissioner Scharf, for keeping it short. So we'll go around the table here if there's other commissioners that would like to add any comments.
I mean, I have quite a lot also. Not as much as him,
If we might take
in pieces.
pass, yeah. Let's
All right.
try and keep it moving here.
Yeah, that's fair.
Thank you.
So I think to Mrs. Poon's comments here, I think that's an important one. I just had a question for the staff. Did the city, when you were doing the community feedback portion of this project, did you solicit feedback on car driving problems like running red lights, not stopping at stop signs? One of my very good friend lives at a stop sign, and she tells me all the time nobody stops at the stop signs. People just drive on through, day or night, and so it is an epidemic. So just wondering if you solicited feedback on that as well.
We did. And in the web map and in this online survey that we provided, residents could provide those specific comments, which they did.
Great. Okay. And then my next question was: are there any other projects being considered, or what we see in the project list? Is that it? That's the kind of what's going to be the final list of projects?
It could be modified depending on if there's strong community interest in specific projects that aren't identified. When we're going out to the public, they have the option to add improvement projects that aren't included on the map. So depending on the amount of comments received, we could reevaluate that.
Okay, great. Just to make a quick comment on Commissioner Scharf's comment about the high-stress routes versus the low-stress routes. The high-stress routes are often the destinations, not necessarily something you use to get through to somewhere else. So I bike around town also. I use low-stress routes when I'm trying to get through to somewhere else, but very often the restaurants, the banks, the cafes, the coffee shop are on the high-stress route, and so I bike on the high-stress route. So there is a need for making those safe. because there are a lot of destinations on there, and I don't know that it's reasonable to say, take a huge long detour so you can get to your destination without ever touching the high stress streets. The no stopping, as I mentioned before, I totally agree with Commissioner Sarf on that. It's a problem. The SVBC biking classes, Bike Solutions is awesome. Highly love them. I know we've used them extensively, so I agree with his comment on that as well. So I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Commissioner Lindskog. Vice Chair, would you like to ask any questions or make comments?
Sure. So first of all, I thank you, staff, for the very comprehensive data and research. I did want to echo some of the public comments around fairness potentially being exchanged for a different metric in the spirit of being data-driven. I did see the bicycle counts white paper, and I see that it's an option to install counters. I know that it comes at a cost, but to the extent that we can do it in places and in a way that is somewhat cost efficient to help us rank projects better, because right now it's hard to tell, you may have a project at an intersection, but very few people use it versus a lot. And it feels like we have the numerator for the equation, which is how many collisions and accidents happen, but we don't have the denominator of like how many people are actually walking or biking here. So to the extent we can get more data, that would be great. I did, as a small piece of feedback on the bike matrix, for biking, I don't know how important it is to have 5 points for presence of major transit stops along the roadway. To my knowledge, most bikers do not really bike to get on a bus and then go somewhere else and then pick their bike up. That is a feature on the VTA buses, but it's not very heavily used, and I don't think that that's how most people, especially the school students, are planning their routes out. So that's just a thought. And then I did want to note that, so I think this is really great research, but we also should be taking into account the car ridership as well. And right now it's getting only 10 points on the rating, even in the rubric. But, some of our major roads, for example, Stevens Creek is getting, and this data, to caveat, is 10 years old. So you could assume that it's probably more by now. But Stevens Creek, for example, gets about 30,000 cars a year. You've got Homestead gets cars per day. Homestead gets about 50,000 cars per day in parts. You've got Bollinger with 30,000 or so in parts. Wolf Road, 33,000. And so, I think I fully understand the ATP as a document for walking and biking, and that perhaps this rubric and the scoring remains purely walking and biking, but I think to look at the infrastructure decisions in a vacuum of only impact to biking and walking without, taking into account, mainly on major roadways, not on the smaller ones, but not taking into account the tens of thousands of cars going down these roads feels a little bit like it's missing part of the picture. And I thank you for the Vision Zero dashboard. That was very, very helpful, looking at all the collision data. My thought is that I think that there are ways that we can improve safety without necessarily having to always impact traffic. And one example is last year, there was a fatality along Stevens Creek and De Anza, and it really actually just happened from a pedestrian at night. And the solution to that, I imagine, would have been something simple, possibly like better night lighting for the crosswalk. So, to the extent that there are solutions that can help the bikers, the walkers, and not necessarily, have a gigantic, or actually helpful to the cars and not necessarily have a gigantic impact on them, I think there's many ways that we can improve the safety for all groups. But it's worth taking into account somewhere. I also really wanted to support, I wanted to note the bike, and just as a side note, the bike and ped shared use paths. It was helpful to know from staff that the Regnart Creek Trail averages about 600 users per day, whether it's a weekday or a weekend, which shows that these kinds of investments are adding a lot of value to our community. And where we have opportunities to do more of this, these are the safest routes that we are creating and also become recreational for the community. So I'll leave my feedback there for now, but yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Vice Chair. Commissioner Fong, would you like to make any questions
in the
or
interest
comments?
of time, I have very few comments. I thank the team for the presentation earlier. I want to restate that again. One area that has come up in comments that had come to us through the mail were, and I think that this is reinforced just at a glance on the materials that are presented tonight, are that there are definitely areas of, special interest. Clearly, the schools are one of them. We've gotten a number of feedbacks from, from the community as well as tonight to talk about, should the standards for evaluation be a little different there? And that's something I really encourage you to explore that with the community in the next round. I think that there are schools are not the only example of things that may warrant having slightly different metrics and evaluation criteria. But I would try to look for those. I think people definitely see that there are trends with those things. It's not just, it's not just somebody was circulating a message that said let's bump this thing up, but definitely trends about the kinds of things over the years that people have highlighted. There are ways, we actually just had another mention of these things. Are there opportunities for things like trails? Are there opportunities for those to be developed around town? So I would encourage you to look into that further. I think that will be something that would pay off. On the scale of the Cupertino size project, there's a great opportunity to get great input. There's enough people to give input, enough enthusiasm about that, and yet you're not overwhelmed by 4,000 different kinds of special criteria areas. That's it for me.
Thank you, Commissioner Fong. So I do want to maybe see if we can circle back on some of the comments we had. I think there were some comments on stoplight runners. There were some other comments on red light runners. And some of this impacts the safety of pedestrians that are in the crosswalk, even more so than it impacts the automotives. The automotives can step on the gas and try and beat that red light runner, or they might just slow down and stop. But if the pedestrian's in the middle of the crosswalk, there, as we just saw with Stevens Creek Boulevard and the golf course, their odds are even lower. So as you look at this effort, how should you think about infrastructure projects that enable safety but are geared towards reining in bad drivers? What category of projects here are going to address that problem? Because I think that's really what is coming up in a theme here: stoplight runners, not yielding at crosswalks, red light runners, and so on, and speeding.
Yes, so currently we do have language in our program and policy recommendations that discuss those aspects of safety and talk about focusing efforts on red light running through various means, in working with the Sheriff's Department. There's also technologies that can be very effective at addressing some of those problems, which we don't currently have in Cupertino, but such as red light running cameras that can be placed at key intersections that can, we used to have in Cupertino 25 years ago. They were removed for various reasons. But something like that's a technology that we can look at incorporating into our toolbox, say, of recommended improvements at intersections in order to enhance the safety, especially for pedestrians.
And you mentioned this was part of your, you said programs, and what was the term you used?
Program and policy recommendations.
Program and policy recommendations. Now, why wouldn't it be part of your, what was the other list of, was it project recommendations or?
So our plan will ultimately result in a prioritized list of infrastructure recommendations, bicycle and pedestrian capital improvement projects, yes. So currently they are separate. The policy and program recommendations are separate from the infrastructure recommendations that will be created as part of the plan.
So how do we prioritize these as a part of the projects to address safety for the high injury network?
So one thing that we could potentially do, that's kind of alluding to a moment ago, is they could be included as the toolbox. So as we discussed during the presentation, each localized improvement or recommendation that's shown in our map refers to makes reference to a list of possible physical improvements that can be evaluated if that intersection is chosen to be improved through a capital project. If we were to incorporate, say, red light running cameras as one of those recommendations, then when that intersection is chosen for an improvement, we would evaluate the potential for, say, a red light running camera as one of those measures that would be incorporated. It wouldn't be a separate item in itself as a recommendation, but it would be done as part of an intersection safety improvement.
Can I interject?
Sorry, if I may finish up.
Well, I'm trying to talk about your project, if I may.
Let me finish up my comments and then we can switch. So if I understood the response, basically, if an intersection is chosen for improvements, that intersection may include several other improvements in addition to the red light running or whatever else may be identified to rein in bad drivers. Is that what you're saying, that we would do this one intersection at a time? Because it feels like one intersection at a time doesn't solve a more systemic problem that we have. I mean, if you look at Tienza or Stevens Creek, or maybe even Bollinger, you have these red light runners that are serial red light runners. They're not going to just run one intersection. They're going to run that, then the next, and then the next, and they're going to keep going. So how do we accelerate making the high injury network safer by investing in a more holistic manner rather than just one intersection at a time?
The active transportation plan may or may not be the method to do that. So the active transportation plan is created to address intersections or maybe a corridor individually as specific projects. If you were interested in, say, improving a corridor, if we wanted to make all the intersections safe on Stevens Creek Boulevard from red light running, then we could also potentially look at a way of identifying a corridor-wide improvement that would contain, say, half a dozen intersections that we could look at red light running cameras as one alternative. We wouldn't probably want to have a citywide capital project identified within the active transportation plan just because of the scope, the cost of that kind of a project. That would be something that would best happen outside of the plan. Language addressing that could be contained within the policy recommendations, and then based upon that, staff or commissioners or anybody could suggest, say, to City Council that a city work program item be approved and funded that would review the feasibility of and perhaps ultimately implement a safety feature like red light running cameras on a wider basis. But that's something that would probably happen outside of the plan, but be recommended within the plan for staff to look further into.
Okay, and I don't, I guess, understand the mechanics of why this would be outside of the plan. I mean, why wouldn't we say high injury network safety through a corridor-wide investment in technology to apply speeding cameras or red light cameras or stoplight cameras? Why wouldn't that be part of the ATP identified set of projects? I mean, safety is a goal, and I think we agree that the most vulnerable are the pedestrians and the bicyclists because they can't get away fast enough. The automotive might brake or they might accelerate, try to avoid the collision, but the pedestrian is unable to get away.
Again, it relates to the scope of doing that. So saying we want to install red light cameras at all major intersections as an improvement is like saying, let's just install sidewalks everywhere in the city that they're missing as one project. It's theoretically possible, but because of the scope and the cost of doing that, it's better to isolate locations that are particularly problematic. Those can be prioritized, and then we can focus on making those improvements.
Yes, I believe we would look at this as a corridor, like the Stevens Creek corridor or the Dianza corridor. And then, of course, you would have to work your way through the corridor. But at least if we can align on what these high injury networks are, and I believe Stevens Creek might be one of those,
Yes, we can look at it on a quarter by quarter basis within the plan. That's certainly something that could be feasible.
I'm going to yield my time to Commissioner Linscock briefly because I'm not finished yet, but
Okay. Yeah. No. I actually absolutely agree with the Chair Rao on this one. I don't see why this can't be a project. And we're not asking you to boil the ocean and to go after every single intersection in the city, which I understand that's a big ask. But we have Vision Zero. We know which are the most dangerous intersections. We could say we'll take the top 10 or top 15 or however much our budget will allow us to do. So it doesn't necessarily have to be on a corridor by corridor basis because, you know, you might have one or two very dangerous intersections in one corridor and one or two that are not at all. So it might be better to just be like, okay, what are the top 10 most dangerous intersections in our city? We have the data in Vision Zero, and we knock those out first, depending on how much money we have. Maybe it's 8, maybe it's 6, maybe it's 12. I don't know. But I totally agree. I don't see why that can't be a project. Thank you.
yeah, and I think that totally makes sense. I mean, staff understand how best to slice and dice this. But if we can try to apply technology to really make safety a priority for pedestrians and for bicyclists, I think that will encourage active transportation. And I'd like to see us expand your view of projects to try and factor that in. And we might, I think I'm sensing there's broader alignment on the dais for that. We might even formally give you some guidance on that if we should. I want to segue to the shared use paths. Is shared use path the same as trails?
They're squishy definitions. So there's trails, shared use paths, Class 1 facilities. Class 1 facilities are very specifically defined in the highway design manual. They have certain dimensions, certain elevations, certain grades. Trail, shared use paths are a little bit more of a general category.
And so I think there is, at least in my perception, and you know, I get around the city a fair bit, but I think the Regnard Creek Trail has been a success story, right? It's well used by pedestrians, it's well used by high schoolers, it's well used by bicyclists. I see a lot of connectivity getting through from Creekside Park, going east of Creekside Park, and then heading all the way to the library and beyond. So does this plan consider the path to expanding this connectivity network to be shared use paths, or how are we, when we say we want to improve connectivity and improve a network for pedestrians and bicyclists, what is the path to getting there? Is it shared use paths, or is it something else, or how are we thinking about it?
You kind of have to think about it in terms of like the network wide. The 2016 bike plan identified what was called as the loop, which was a set of off-street roadways that kind of, for lack of a better word, looped around the city so that people could travel east-west and north-south. Generally, while the loop is not explicitly mentioned in the ATP, the projects themselves were carried over. So we're trying to provide those connections that you're talking about. Well, not connections, those facilities that you're talking about, and then having those different facilities, the neighborhood routes, the separated bike lanes, the buffer bike lanes to complement those.
Okay, but how would you prioritize these? If you had a certain fixed amount of grant dollars, how would we think about, you know, do we spread ourselves thin, applying them to all of the streets in the city?
We would need to see how the projects get ranked by the community and how prioritization falls. And then from that would be the list of projects. Staff wouldn't make a determination about individual projects irrespective of what the community's wishes are.
And then ultimately recommendations would be made to the CIP, which would be reviewed by City Council, and ultimately they would decide what gets funded and what doesn't.
Are there specific recommendations on the existing trails to make them shared use? I mean, do we believe that the existing trails are just fine as they are for both pedestrians and bicyclists? Because I heard a public comment, I think it was one of the speakers on the phone maybe, talking about Memorial Park being unsafe. So how do you envision these paths being usable and shared in a safe manner between pedestrians and bicyclists?
Correct me if I'm wrong, we're only proposing new facilities in this plan that haven't been constructed, such as the Hunapara-Serra or Tamaninu Trail. we aren't addressing, say, the paths through parks, which would be captured in, say, the Memorial Park Master Plan documents. So we're not going to convert, say, the Regnart Creek Trail to the Regnart Creek mixed-use path or something. Those are existing facilities that function well in their current capacity. So we would be looking at implementing new trails, new mixed-use facilities, new Class 1 facilities where appropriate.
Okay. Other questions or comments? Commissioner Scharf, you had another round?
Yeah. I'm ready for my next round.
You might keep it concise.
Yeah. What about cooperation with the adjacent cities? I know, like, someone on Nextdoor brought up the fact that there had been 2 pedestrian fatalities on Bollinger. Well, it was actually, to be accurate, it was 2 people crossing Bollinger, not at a crosswalk, that were hit by cars and killed. One of them where there probably should be a crosswalk at Wunderlich. And I just wonder, do we work with San Jose to identify these kind of danger points on the border, or is this just going to be strictly Cupertino?
For this plan, we looked at the VTA countywide bikeways plan. So making sure that any of the project recommendations are consistent with the countywide network.
Okay, I guess, okay.
And we would, if the community or council wanted to move forward with a project that was that we shared jurisdiction with the city of San Jose on Bollinger Road, for example, we would reach out to San Jose staff and let them know we're interested in moving forward. Talk about possible opportunities to share funding, that sort of thing. We had started that process when we were going to be moving forward with the Bollinger Road project. So we have good relationships with our colleagues in the adjacent cities and have partnered successfully in the past on other projects.
And last year, we worked with Los Altos, Sunnyvale, and VTA to kind of advance the Homestead Road Safe Routes to School study, bringing that project up to 35% design. And that's being led by VTA. So they're seeking funding for the remaining balance.
So is that going to be a protected bike lane with no parking, or?
One portion of it is recommended to be a protected bike lane. I'm blanking on the segments here, but I believe it's west of Bernardo.
Okay, yeah, I'm familiar with that. Okay, yeah, I just wanted to mention parking. I know that in some cities, what's happened is there's been new development projects that are way underparked. So the residents all then park on use street parking. Then when you try to put in a protected bike lane, you get, all these people very, very upset because, hey, where am I going to park? My apartment complex doesn't include enough parking. And then we can't put in a bike lane because those voices drown out the voices of the people that really would like the bike lane. So I just hope the city and the city council, if a developer takes advantage of state laws that allows them to underpark their project, that it's made clear to them that they will not be able to export all their parking onto city streets. That's not why we have city streets. They're not intended just to be parking lots. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Hey, Commissioner Linscott.
Okay, so I think just to carry forward, before I do that, I just want to mention we have on this dais 2 people who worked really hard on getting the Regnart Creek Trail approved, and I want to thank then Mayor and Council Member Stephen Scharf for pushing that forward. It wouldn't have happened without him being on the dais voting consistently for 6 years in support of it. Is there any weight or consideration being given to connectivity to neighboring city plans? So, for example, the Stevens Creek Trail, I know Sunnyvale's doing a lot to improve connectivity of the Stevens Creek Trail. Are we working with them to improve how we connect to the developments that they are making to the Stevens Creek Trail? Or putting any weight on that in terms of the projects that we look at, because making it easier for our residents to, the people that work at Yahoo or Google or Microsoft or Lockheed Martin, down by the bay, and if they can now bike on Stevens Creek Trail to get to work, or just for recreation to get to the bay, making it easier for our residents to reach these destinations should be a consideration. Same thing with Sunnyvale's working hard on the East Channel Trail. That's another opportunity for Cupertino residents to get to a lot of jobs, a lot of, entertainment destinations, a lot of jobs. Are we putting any consideration or any weight in terms of how these projects will tie into the projects that we are looking at?
At this time, no, but that's something we certainly consider.
So I also wanted to talk about the fairness criteria. Many people have mentioned the Regnar Creek Trail. As I mentioned, it went through 6 years of community feedback. It got a lot of pushback. We got death threats. We got all kinds of fun stuff for 6 years. And it's become a hugely popular trail right now. So, and it was, I lived through, it was 6 years of escalating, comments from each side, which doesn't serve anyone. It just creates more divisiveness in the community. And it is much better if we focus on objective measures and agree on what are the points of conflict and that we can objectively measure and focus on those, rather than open it up to a Wild West of counting how many positive comments or negative comments there are against a project. It serves no positive purpose. So I would be in favor of deleting that criteria entirely. And yeah, if we want to put in another type of criteria, I'm open to that. But having lived through 6 years of that, I can tell you it serves no good purpose, and it doesn't inform the quality of the project in any way. I have a tentative motion I wanted to put up on the screen to summarize things, so I wanted to see if I could go through it, but I'll let other comments.
Yeah, I did have some more comments if you're complete. I do agree with Commissioner Linscock that this whole notion of counting comments is like a bean counter where you're not counting even all the beans, because you've got people that simply can't enter their input. There's people that are seniors that don't even take these surveys because they're not technology savvy. There's people that don't want to get on a desktop to take these surveys. There's people that are just disengaged or uninformed or unmotivated. And so I think we should really test for where you have broad areas of consensus. And what I saw tonight was, I think, the ability to advance a network through shared use paths, I think, is an area that has proven itself. Regnar Creek Trail, we have the hopefully the Linda Vista Trail, we have hopefully the Tamian Innu Trail, and we'll have maybe a Lawrence Mitty Trail in future, and maybe others. And so, I think there's broad areas of support for advancing the network through shared use paths. I also sense broad areas of support for advancing the safety agenda through the use of focused investments in the high injury network and in the intersections. I did have some comments on whether that high injury network considered pedestrians, because when I looked at the list, it seemed like a strange list. Some of it wasn't really making sense from a pedestrian perspective, so I would encourage you to think about pedestrians separately from bicyclists, so you have a full list for both, and you're taking care of both pedestrians and bicyclists. And I believe there is support there for infrastructure improvements for safety along the high injury network. Whether you approach it by intersection or a set of intersections, we'll leave it to staff. I also saw some support for, so how should we think about these stop sign runners? Is there technology similar to red light runners that helps with stop sign runners, or is there something else from a safety perspective that really addresses stoplight issues or stop sign issues?
I'm not aware of any technological solutions to addressing stop sign running. It's something I can research. Currently, it's working with the sheriff department to identify locations that have a known history of stop sign running and targeting enforcement at those locations. But I can research and see if there's any other solutions available.
Okay.
So let me interrupt. I know at some school intersections, they have been putting out those orange flags that you pick up, and the cars do seem to stop at the stop sign when they see a kid or an adult carrying one of those flags. You know, someone suggested we put in bricks instead of flags, but I don't think that would be appropriate.
And so I think, trying to move this discussion along, what I'd like to do is maybe, and maybe another question. So you have asked us for input on your prioritization criteria, which seems like a bit of sausage making, frankly. But you have advanced the project page to a number of documents. Is there a reason we didn't look at those documents as the main focus area for this review? I mean, why this prioritization criteria versus looking at the docs and giving you feedback on the docs?
Documents that are, is this on? Yeah. The documents that are available online, we're really summarizing the work from phase one. So you have the needs assessment memo, which was the analysis that Alta did with David Wasserman. The existing conditions memo, which just lays out our network and kind of city demographics and how the transportation system kind of functions today, including transit. A memo summarizing the public participation that, like the public engagement that we did in phase one, bicycle count white paper that kind of goes into detail about the various options the city could consider if it does want to pursue implementing a citywide count program. So this was really the most actionable item that we could bring to you.
Okay. So I would encourage you to come back with your draft recommendations whenever that's ready, even if it's not a final draft. I think this whole give us input on prioritization really is meaningless, because it feels like we need to be talking about the gist of what you're going to go and address. And so it would be good to come back with the memo when you're ready for that, if you can. So I'm gonna, I know Commissioner Linscock said you have a motion. I'm gonna probably try and do this where we have areas of broad agreement. So let me see if we can move a few things along here and see if you have.
I don't think a motion is necessary because this is.
I would like to see if we can make some motions. So yes, why don't you go ahead?
Can I propose my motion,
please.
and then we can, I'll put that out. We can work on it together. So I have to join the meeting, right, to share it?
You could read it out.
No, it's pretty long. So I have to join the meeting to.
Yeah, I think so.
Right. Sorry? Because you can promote me as a participant, right?
Yeah, you can join it through the agenda.
Okay.
Or we can do it in a more simplified form, looking at areas where I think we have consensus. We can make recommendations to.
It's a little longer, so let me try that, because I would like to see if I can share my screen. Okay, I'm in the meeting.
So, Chair, the agenda item said to provide feedback. I thought that's what we did.
And feedback could be through a set of votes to give them very specific
perfect.
feedback.
Thank
So they're
you.
not sort of scatterbrained on taking direction from 5 discrete individuals.
I have to find the screen now. Hold on.
I'm prepared to start moving this thing into a motion if.
Give me a second. I'm almost there.
And again, I don't want to make it too difficult. Just keep it simple so they get some direction that can be taken to the next step. Do you want to send it to the clerk? We don't see it.
Now we see it. Okay.
Okay, see it. Okay.
Okay, so this is what I would like to propose.
Is there a
and
way you can zoom it? I don't think we can zoom it here.
Sure. How do I? Oh, here. No. That better?
Yeah, that's more
Yep.
better.
Oh.
Oh, yeah.
Oi, oi. Okay, wait, let me try 120. Is that better? Oh, what's going on? Wow. Oh, there. Okay, I'm going to stay with 100. Or
125 worked, I think. Yeah,
okay.
there you go.
It just went nuts when I did that. So, okay. So here's what I'm proposing. That we add a project to make the most high entry network intersections with red lights and stop signs safer using whatever tools the staff can figure out that are appropriate, such as red light cameras. I don't want to necessarily specify what those tools should be. And then modify the scoring criteria as follows. So for the school proximity score, change that to within half a mile of a school. And then add senior housing and senior facilities, such as a senior center, to the access metric. So we're not only considering parks, but also senior housing, because a lot of seniors go out and walk in their neighborhoods. So I think it's important to provide them with walking safety. Since connectivity was the number one most important thing that residents cited, my suggestion is we change sustainability to connectivity, because it seemed like that's really what it was about, and make that add 10 points if it's within a quarter mile of a trail or low stress facility like a class 4 bike lane, which would also increase the score for this entire section of connectivity to 20 points is 10 points, which would make it, I think, the third most important, which seems appropriate because that was the number one thing for residents. And then balance. So that one, residents were talking about how we had to remove 3 parking spaces to make the Regnar Creek Trail. Given, and I think that's a reasonable question. So instead of focusing on the impact, if we can focus on the infrastructure and say we still do the minus 10 points, but only if it's a removal of a substantial number of parking spaces that are regularly used. So for example, and we can massage the numbers, whatever that is, but let's say it's 5+ parking spaces that are used regularly. So if it's like parking spaces that no one ever uses and we're removing them, and it has no impact on anyone, that shouldn't necessarily weigh the same as a parking space that's used a lot. And then minus 10 points if we eliminate a car lane for a substantial portion of the project length. So again, because I think what we're trying to solve for is that it doesn't impact traffic through flow or traffic speed. And rather than just saying anytime you eliminate any car speed, then car lane,
Commissioner, I think we can read the motion. So
yeah, but I'm trying to explain why I'm saying this. So for example, on De Anza, they removed 0.4% of the car length, and it had no impact on the traffic or the throughput. So I think that should be taken into consideration. And then fairness, as we talked about, we should just delete that one. So I look forward
would
to
you
Lisa.
accept friendly amendments to this? I'd like to suggest a friendly amendment to change the first one. Thank you for adding that first one. I'd like to add speeding cameras in addition to red light cameras. Is that part of that motion? The first.
Sure. Red light, isn't that kind of the same thing? Red
No,
light?
I believe those are 2 different things. There's speeding cameras, there's red light cameras.
Okay.
Are
Red
there
light.
other suggestions from staff on technology?
That's why I didn't want to make an exhaustive list.
With respect to the speeding cameras, the special legislation that allows for those 6 cities to have this pilot program, that legislation came together not through like a application process, but rather it was because after 4 previous attempts to pass legislation on that kind of detection, they failed.
So with due respect, sounds like a lot of sausage making. I think this is a 10-year plan. Legislations change over 10 or 15 years.
So the pilot program is 5 years or 2032, whichever soonest. And then at that point, the legislature would need to evaluate the pilot program and then pass additional legislation that would allow for local jurisdictions to implement a program. So you're looking at maybe the city would be allowed to implement cameras 2034.
Again, I think we are giving guidance at this stage. I don't think whether the legislation is there yet or not is material at this point in time.
Okay.
So I'd like to not sort of apply undue criterias on selective input when there's other areas we could do the same with.
Okay.
So would we accept a friendly amendment? Oh,
Yeah, I
you're not
put that
seeing the
in.
motion.
I put speeding cameras in there.
I guess it's not shared anymore.
Oh.
Your screen's not visible.
It says screen sharing.
We don't see it. Okay, there we go.
I put speeding cameras in there.
And then the other one I'd like to see if we can modify is I don't see the connection of the senior center to this. I'm the newest cohort of Cupertino seniors, and I visit the senior center enough, and I don't see a single bike at the senior center. So I'm not sure what the senior center is doing in this
It's
1B.
about pedestrians. Seniors walk a lot, and we're talking about putting in a cafe in that new
Oh, I see. So
development.
you're combining the bike and the ped criteria into the same.
They are combined already, aren't they?
I thought they had different criteria for bike versus ped.
They're similar but distinct.
Yeah.
I meant to put it in both.
So maybe we can just separate that out and we can.
So put the senior housing only in pedestrian,
Yeah.
you mean? Sure, that's fine. So
probably a
I can
net.
make that call.
I'd like to make some more amendments on the balance section between letters B and C. I know that we're not looking at a fixed total amount of points, but for the sake of getting consensus on this, I would absolutely decrease the number of points in letter B and then shift some of those to C. So let's say you have -5 points if it's removing 5 parking spots and -15 if it's eliminating a car lane. And the rationale being, again, going back to the numbers, you've got tens of thousands of cars going down our major roads, and it's just in no way comparable to removing 5 parking spots when it comes to impact. I mean, I would actually give this number a much higher point score, but I probably wouldn't get buy-in, so let's leave it at 15.
I'm good with that.
And then the second, if we could, if there's appetite to add supporting bike counts, I think that, having a quantitative baseline to understand whether or not these investments are successful or not is really important. So if we would like to support the bike count project.
So I'm kind of torn on the bike count thing because it's a chicken and the egg where you can say there aren't very many bikes on there, therefore we shouldn't build it, but it's really because it's unsafe right now.
That's not where I'm going with it.
Okay.
The idea is to show lift. To, at the end of, let's say you're looking at a road that has few bikes at the moment, you count that, and then at the end of the project you can say we increased active usage of this road by X. But
how is that a criteria for prioritizing the projects before we start on them?
It's just a helpful baseline so that we can be accountable when it comes to how did we spend our money.
So it's outside the criteria. So what you're saying is do bike counts.
It's in the
as a base.
in the top, I guess in the top section in the bullet point.
So
underneath.
Yeah, I get it.
Where
so
you're talking
it would
about.
be more like do a bike count or of existing usage as a baseline before starting a project, or on each on each bike proposed bike infrastructure.
Or you could say on major proposed bike infrastructure, because I understand that there is a per instance
major
cost.
proposed bike project. Okay. Yeah. Cool.
And let's see. So did we have a separate? Okay, yeah. So I lost my trail of thought briefly, but on the school proximity, I wonder if staff have data on whether this really applies as much to elementary schools. I mean, I'm a parent in an elementary school. I'm a Safe Routes to School parent rep in an elementary school and have been for a long time. I don't see anybody biking to elementary schools, maybe 5th grade at best, but
Can I
not
speak
before
to that?
Sure.
So you have a school of choice, I believe?
I have been in others before that. I've been in
So-
a neighborhood school as well.
I was the Safe Routes to School parent for Eaton, and there were a lot of kids who walked and biked to school, and greater distances than a quarter mile from my own personal experience. So yes, I think that is, and honestly, that was what the data was that I think Commissioner Marcy shared with us.
Yes, certainly
So-
walking I would not dispute. I'm specifically referring to biking. What grades do you think do they start biking?
We had a lot of kids who biked at Eaton from the neighborhood. I mean, and there's pretty extensive bike racks there, and I mean, kids bike. If it's safe, they will bike. So
Yeah, I mean, my kids also went to Eaton. We walked. We're very close, but the youngest I remember is a third grader in our neighborhood who biked to school. It was not that common, but it did exist.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if maybe this should be changed to middle and high schools versus all schools in the interest of, there's a lot of schools in Cupertino. I think CUSD has, 20-something schools. If you start including elementary schools, that's a long list. Can we focus this on middle and high schools?
I think half a mile is not that much, as Commissioner Marcy said. I mean, if he's coming from the Biltmore to Eaton, and that's over half a mile is a pretty short distance. So I think we should keep it at half a mile.
Any thoughts from others? Doesn't really matter because they're all co-located. Is that Monta Vista and Lincoln? All right. So I'm interested in any other changes to this motion. Commissioners Scharf and Fong.
So I had raised a bunch of points regarding like Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition, how we should remove that from the policy and change it just to
How do you want to phrase that?
partner with bicycle education organizations to offer routine adult and family education classes. We don't have to mention
Bicycle education.
We don't have to mention Bicycle Solutions or Wheel Kids. We can just say partner with bicycle education providers.
With bicycle education providers to what?
To offer routine adult and family bicycle education classes in Cupertino.
Okay. Anything else?
I was probably going to propose that we, in the interest of trying to get to common ground here, keep the fairness criteria and remove your number 4 on this list.
Which is what?
In order to get to common ground, we're going to get to 80% of common ground. We're going to have to give up a few things. And I think that's...
I will tell you, I kind of feel strongly about that one. As I said, I've lived through 6 years of that, and I feel like that's, as I said in here, it's like a nuclear arms race, right? It's like each side is just going to bring out more and more and more and more speakers, and at the end of the day, how does it serve anyone? I think we're better off just getting, agreeing on objective measures on what are the things that bother people, like traffic, like safety, like, proximity to senior housing or schools, and use objective measures instead.
I still struggle with, I think the fairness criteria had to do with impact to roads, and I think there's a large number of...
That was balance.
That was balance?
Yeah, it's covered in balance.
So what was the fairness criteria again? Can someone remind me?
The fairness criteria was just how many comments there are, period. That's it.
Okay, I'm willing to go with that, yeah. Yeah, no, I agree, I echo that. I think we shouldn't really be bean counting this thing towards... I think
Exactly.
we got to work towards finding common ground and see how we can actually make something work that meets people's needs and isn't sort of serving one set and not the other. I think that doesn't do anybody any good, right? And I think there's a lot of shared agreement on a number of topics. I think everybody thinks safety is important. Everybody thinks shared use paths are important. People certainly want to see pedestrian improvements. The more, the better. Schools are important. So, where do we disagree, right? Where we disagree, I think, are a few things, which is taking away road lanes and taking away right turns. And I think we've got to find a way to accommodate both. And I think you're doing some of that with the right turn modern design, with pedestrian sensing, the bicyclist sensing that you're doing. I don't believe you're taking away right turns. Is that right? That's a sensor-based.
Are you talking about right on red or right turns?
Right on red.
Okay. I mean, there have been several eliminations of right on red already.
Well, but again, I want to acknowledge and give kudos to staff for working with the community to make improvements. For example, at Stelling, I want to recognize David Stillman that made a change at Stelling to limit the no right turn on red to only the school hours, and that's a really good change, so people can actually make those right turns when they need to. I'm okay with this motion, so...
Great, can I get
Are
a
there
second?
other changes?
So,
Oh, sorry.
if I could just comment, the only thing, so generally speaking, I don't have too much of a problem with this. I do, although I understand the interest here in trying to work on red light runners and speeding, I think that I'd like the scope of the project to not be grown in a way that makes it difficult for it to be successful, for that to, because of the high capital costs, it's been cited here, that would become something that would dominate the discussion. And then you miss out on some of the things like, even if I don't exactly agree with the point changes here, I feel very strongly, that they're in the right direction. And if the focus of the project becomes more, how do we get the right answer for schools and those sorts of things? I'd rather see us do that than spend a lot of time battling over red light services, especially if it's very difficult for it to be something that could be realized, in kind of a 10-year time frame or.
So if I can just comment on that, that's a good point. But I don't think we're saying to prioritize that over any other project. We're just saying add that as a project. And then, it gets prioritized using all these criteria just like any other project. So, and then in terms of the cost, as we mentioned before, it could, it doesn't have to be a boil the ocean, let's do every single intersection in the city. It can be, let's tackle the first 4 most dangerous ones to begin with, and then work our way down. So the budget is very flexible, right? And as we have found with most bike ped projects, the vast majority of them are paid by grants. Yeah. They're very cost efficient to the city. I think it's like 85% of the cost of bike ped projects are usually covered by grant money. So I think. I don't think that should stop us from putting that on as a project for now, and then we'll see where it lands in the prioritization.
Yeah, and I would just quickly add that safety for schools and near schools is largely also about controlling bad drivers. I mean, I see this day in and day out. I'm the traffic volunteer at Faria. I was actually at Faria with our city staff this morning. And a big part of the problem is bad drivers, and we do need to do something about bad drivers because we can do all the capital projects to elevated crosswalks, and you can go down the list. But if we don't control the bad drivers, they're just going to keep causing issues, and we need a little balance there as well.
So perhaps we had to move that down much farther in the list, rather than it be the first thing, so that people look at this list, we didn't have to have a motion from this hearing. So, so that people don't look at it and go, oh, okay, they want to do red light.
At this point, I think we're kind of splitting hairs on this. I think the spirit of this is we are giving guidance in a directed manner, but the prioritization and the funding, all of that will come back, and we'll have a second chance to review it, and we can give that input, because I believe
you should move it down. You should move it down. Make it the last thing.
I'm happy to move these all down under the criteria. It makes no difference, right?
Yeah, it really doesn't matter. Yep. And so with that, I think I will second this motion.
Great. Thank you.
Did we, going back to the, can we see that? Can we see the motion one more time? What was under the balance you added, the -5 and the -15?
That was rebalancing the parking spaces versus car lane that the vice chair had requested.
Okay. And then did we have something on the criteria for no right turn on red? Was that part of your balance criteria, or was that a more general criteria, not impacting roads?
No, there was nothing in the criteria. No right on red.
There's no mention of right on red.
Okay. Would you accept a friendly amendment to add a negative score if it caused a no right turn on red. I mean, we have adaptive right turns on red, which is kind of a balance, which is really the direction staff are going right now.
How would you phrase that? I mean, I'm hesitant to say no right turns on red because that's a huge. I mean, the majority of accidents at intersections happen on right turns on red.
Right. So I think rather than a score, we may move it to the bottom list there and say prioritize sensor-driven pedestrian. What is the term for that? Sensor-driven pedestrian bicyclist detection. What are your sensors at Wolf and Stevens Creek called? The ones that sense and...
You're talking about the video detection, active pedestrian detection?
So you have right turns from Stevens Creek onto Wolf, but those are also activated by the smart sensors for bicyclists.
Yes, at Stevens Creek and Wolf, there is it's not a full-time no right turn on red. So there's
what is the
there's subtle distinctions to be made with the right turn on red.
So what is that technology called?
So I'm not sure what technology you're referring to, Chair. So we use video detection to detect the presence of bicycles and vehicles at that intersection and several other intersections throughout the city.
And those activate?
They give a signal, a message to the traffic signal controller that says there's a vehicle present or there's a bicycle present, and so the traffic signal will serve that bicycle or that vehicle in its turn throughout the signal phase.
Okay, so that basically...
But that's just a replacement for, say, in-pavement inductive loops, which are the historic way of detecting vehicles and bicycles at intersections.
Right, but it does allow right turns on red when there are no bicyclists, correct?
So that's not necessarily a function of the type of detection. You can allow or restrict right turns on red at any intersection using any type of or lack of technology.
So would you make a suggestion on wording if you wanted to propose an addition to this motion?
I would be hesitant to have a blanket negative score for projects.
Not so much a score, but just something to consider in the bottom part of the motion. This is not a discussion on score anymore. What would be the terminology? I'm looking for the wording for that.
Can I suggest that maybe if I understand what you're asking for correctly, that we put in some wording that says, let me think about this, that we consider traffic flow when improving right turn on red or when making right turn on red improvements?
I would probably just change the first bullet at the bottom where you say speeding cameras. I would just add, adaptive right turns on red, for lack of other words.
Adaptive meaning it is responsive to conditions at the time?
Responsive to the presence of a bicyclist or not.
Okay.
Well, by adding that there, does that then imply that we are trying to change all of our right turns on red? I think.
Not necessarily, because we're just listening.
So maybe another way to state it is prioritize adaptive right turns on red over no right turns on red.
Well, I would hesitate to specify a specific tool because different intersections might require different solutions. So that's why I was trying to focus on what is it that you're trying to achieve.
So maybe the other way I would phrase it is I would say consider adaptive right turns on red where feasible.
Sure. Okay.
So could we put that in on the bullets that you've added?
As a separate bullet?
Yeah.
Okay.
Because I think this whole having the ability to enable right turns except when you have a bicyclist is a win-win. Would you agree?
Yes, so I understand what you're saying. So yeah, that is what the technology that we currently have implemented on Stevens Creek at Wolf.
And that's a reasonable middle ground
Yes.
where you can...
So that only restricts right turns when there's a bicycle present and crossing the street. Otherwise, right turns are allowed.
Yeah, so that's a reasonable thing because if it's not school hours, you may have no bikers and traffic can still get through.
Okay, so I added that as number 2 with the second bullet, if that...
Yep, looks good to me.
Looks good.
I think we have a motion and a second.
Great.
Do we reset this vote?
Wait, I haven't voted.
How do we?
The motion carries unanimously.
Okay, great. Wonderful. I want to thank our commissioners for laboring through this. I also think we have shown to all of those complaining about the Planning Commission that we can work together and find common ground and make things happen. And hopefully we set an example for other commissions and the council as well on working together across the aisle. Now, whether the recommendations taken is a different question. We have a perfect record of our recommendations being rejected so far. And so with that, I want to close this agenda item. I want to thank staff for your time on this. And we were going to move on, except we have lost our staff liaison. I see that staff from planning have left us. And so we do not have any staff reports at this time, unless David wants to fill in for Luke. Are there any commission reports at this time? No commission reports?
Yes.
Okay.
So I just wanted to report that Commissioner Tracy and I took the CERT class last month. It's very hard for Cupertino people on commissions to take it because it's always on Tuesdays and Thursdays. But during the off month in, I guess it was in August, we had how many Cupertino people? Like 10 or 12 Cupertino.
Yeah, at least 10.
Yeah, former mayors, commission members, council members. Yeah, we had quite a showing there. And I would encourage everyone here to consider taking the CERT class when it's available.
Thank you, Commissioner Scharf. Any other commission reports? Okay, if no other commission reports, any future agenda setting? Okay, if no future agenda setting, then the meeting is adjourned. Thank you.